Welcome to the Hunting Beast Podcast, your source for hunting tactics, news, and stories. And now your host, Mario Traficante.
Okay, well, welcome to this week's edition of the Hunting Beast Podcast. This week we have on Todd Havel, also known as Magic Man 54494 on the Hunting Beast, and he's pretty well known for tracking, and not only tracking whitetail, but tracking them in big woods. He enjoys doing this, and we've got a lot of feedback that people like to get a little bit more information on how he goes about doing it, go over the gear, how he picks his tracks, just tracking in general, cadence, pace, weather, terrain. So with that, Todd, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Always good to be talking about something deer hunting related. So, I guess we can start out with, I do this with a lot of guys. You know, how did you get into getting an interest in the outdoors and just tracking or hunting in general?
Well, I grew up in central Wisconsin on a hobby farm, and my dad deer hunted just with a rifle. And my grandpa, he was really big into hunting and fishing. He was all outdoors. If there was anything to do with the outdoors, he did it his whole life, and he was a big influence with me as well. Took me out in the field a lot, taught me a lot of things. But I never really learned the art of killing big deer. My grandpa was more along the lines of a meat hunter.
Sure.
If it was a legal deer, he would take it. My dad was a big into fox trapping. That actually taught me a lot of lessons that I use in my deer hunting as well. One of the things that he taught me that I always stress to people is don't be excited about having success. Instead, figure out why you were successful. And then if you can figure out why, you can duplicate it over and over and over again and have many successes. So I kind of always lived by that when it comes to the outdoors. I looked at what happened and tried to figure out why, instead of, just being excited that I caught a fish or shot a deer or whatever it happened to be. And so that kind of spurred me into, where I am today as far as trophy hunting. I ran the gamut, of course, shooting any legal deer with my bow and with my gun, and kind of graduated up the scale to shooting bucks. And I reached a point in the mid-90s where I just said, I have never shot a big one. I'm going to shoot a big one. And I kind of dedicated myself to doing that. And just so happened the first year I decided to do it, I would say it was more luck than skill, but I did take a nice deer. And from there, it kind of just went crazy. I don't know, it just, over the last, I don't know how many years that is now, 15, 20 years, I've shot an awful lot of big ones, but I think it was the decision to switch gears and do things different and to dedicate, to trying to get the big ones instead of just shooting anything that comes along, because even back then I realized they were a different animal and I had to do things differently to have success.
Yeah, I've heard that before from other guys that, or I guess we've heard that in conversation, that you can, making the conscious choice to kind of move on to a more challenging animal or a bigger age class animal, or challenging yourself to do that. Otherwise, you will be sort of occupied with what else is out there,
Yeah, well, there's a big difference between wanting to shoot a trophy deer and attempting to do it, or trying to do it, or making moves to make it happen. Everybody wants to shoot one, but if you continue doing the same things you were doing, you're going to get the same results.
Sure.
which is no trophy deer. So, you definitely got to do things differently. I know from my standpoint, when I met Dan, it was kind of a light bulb going on moment, because I realized that the bigger deer, the older mature bucks, were in these places where people just didn't want to hunt, where people didn't want to go, where it was too nasty, it was too miserable, it was too far in, that sort of thing. And back then, that was my technique, was to just push myself into those areas and hope for the best. But when I met Dan, he had a whole new level with that, and that was actually the bed hunting. Finding the actual spot where they're laying, and then working them from that. Which was like, wow, that's genius. I can't figure out. I don't know why I didn't think of that. I mean, it makes so much sense. It was like, well, yeah, that's what you got to do.
Right. So what types of things did you start doing when you made the switch from consciously collecting information about why you were successful? What types of things did you start tracking information on?
Well, basically, when I made the switch to try to shoot a mature deer, again, it was, I stopped hunting areas where there weren't mature deer during the light of day. I just stopped doing that, and I would go to places where if I didn't see deer, I didn't care. I knew my odds were better, and so I guess a lot has to do with just putting myself in better positions. And then also, here's another big thing. As my learning progressed, what I found was I had to unlearn, which is more difficult than learning. I had to unlearn all the stuff that was taught to me through hunting partners, elders, hunting magazines. Wow, was there a lot of misinformation out there. And I was basing my hunting techniques off of that information, and it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And as when you walk in the woods, you see things, you're drawn to things, you want to hunt a certain way, and you have to break those patterns. You have to break those patterns in order to be successful, and that was probably the biggest thing, is unlearning things that weren't successful.
Right.
And
right.
And then trying new things. And another thing too that I was never afraid of. I was never afraid to try something new. I always tried something new. One technique I used up in northern Wisconsin with a lot of success, at least as far as getting animals to come near me, was calling. I did a lot of calling in northern Wisconsin, which people said didn't work. I went about it a little different. I instead of trying to rattle horns and hope that a buck would come into a fight, I would actually run around and try to mimic the noise of a buck tending a doe. I would run back and forth and break as much brush as I could, and I'd throw in a couple of grunt calls. And while I was doing this, I was constructing myself a ground blind, and then I'd duck into there and I'd sit down and I'd wait for 2 hours. And believe it or not, sometimes they hold up for an hour and a half or longer before they'll come in. And I brought a lot of big bucks in that way. Unfortunately, it was with a bow in my hand, and sealing the deal is tough.
Sure.
Getting him to commit the rest of the way, or to walk right on top of you. I had several opportunities, and one time I hit a branch, and it's just, I called a lot of big deer in, and I thought, wow, if I had a rifle in my hand, I'd have a wall full of them. But it was a technique that other people said, well, it just doesn't work. It isn't successful. And I always said that when I was doing this, when I'm running back and forth and breaking branches and grunting, and if anybody saw me, they would have called the guys in the white jackets to come and get me and lock me up. But it worked, and it still works to this day. I call, but of course my love now is tracking whenever there's snow on the ground, so I don't do as much calling. Plus, I'm a lot busier nowadays, so I don't get up north to do any archery hunting. I haven't been up north archery hunting in 5 years, so my time is a lot more limited now with my job.
Sure. Well, what that technique sounds, it's a lot like other techniques where you're getting closer to the behavior that's being displayed by the animal that you're hunting, sort of immersing yourself in what's going on, during the rut. Um, so, yeah, it's pretty interesting and intriguing, actually. Actually, it had to be a lot of
Another,
fun to do, I would think.
oh, it was a blast because you moved around all the time and it was exciting. You covered a lot of country and of course, I think a lot of my success was due to knowing where to set up too. I just didn't randomly walk through the woods and just plop down anywhere. I stayed on edges. I stayed by bedding areas. I tried to, I'd move from area to area. A lot of that country up there I knew, so I would, I might walk a mile before I stop and try it again.
Right.
And target specific areas. Of course, I always kind of had a inkling as to where the deer were coming from or where they might be bedded and so forth, so I would try to play the wind in my favor when I could. But yeah, it worked. It worked. Another little thing, again, getting back to that idea of just doing things differently. I ran across a hot area. There was a doe in heat there. The area was all tore up and it was fresh. I mean, it was hours fresh. And I was hoping that they would stick around. It was really late in the day. It was end of hunting hours, so I didn't try to hunt it that night, but I was in there the next morning. Well, I drove back there and walked in, and to my surprise, it had froze really hard that night. We had a hard frost, and the leaves were crunchy, and the woods was dead quiet. And every step I took, I just cringed because I figured every animal within a half a mile was running the other way when I walked in.
Sure.
But I thought, well, you know what I need to do? I need to mimic a deer. So I started like tiptoeing like a deer would walk instead of a man walking on his foot, rolling his feet every step.
Right.
And I just crunch. I went in really fast like that. And as I did that, I grabbed my grunt call out and I threw in a couple of soft grunts as I was going along, and I closed that, last couple 100 yards to where I wanted to set up. Doing that, it wasn't long. I had a little spike buck circle way downwind of me, and he took off. And just a few minutes later, I heard crunch, and a real dandy 10-pointer come walking right up, hit a crossing in a trail there, and stood right there broadside at 30 yards. Well, unfortunately, I had set my bow down, and I had a arrow rest similar to like a whisker biscuit. It was like a knockoff of the whisker biscuit that came with my bow, and my arrow actually must have got pushed down in there, and it wasn't sitting in the center of that, because when I shot, I hit the ground right by his feet. And it was 30 yards. That should have been an easy shot, and that was way off for that distance. And I could have cried, but it worked. The technique worked. Instead of saying, "Oh man, I can't get in here without making noise and scaring everything," I decided to use it to my advantage, actually.
So, what made you think of just trying that? I mean, I think a lot of guys probably would have either turned around and left, or just walked in normally and spooked everything out of the woods. I mean, what made that pop into your head to just give it a try?
I really don't know. I guess just a lot of years in the woods and just thinking, okay, what am I going to do with this? And I've had that happen more than once during the rut. Sometimes it's your advantage to make as much noise as you can. It can play in your favor, believe it or not.
Sure.
I'm never afraid to make noise, and like I said, if it's a noisy walk, I'll just tiptoe like a deer would walk and use that to my advantage. I shot a really dandy 8-pointer up in Minnesota that same way. I went into my rifle stand and it was the same situation, and so I mimicked a deer walking in and said, "Okay, good enough." And I climbed my climber as quick as I could, and he was there in 15 minutes.
Nice.
So it's a technique that I've used a few times over the years, to success. But yeah, if it's going to be really a quiet woods and it's really noisy walking, use it to your advantage. I guess it's those thinking outside the box kind of things of, how can I use this to my advantage? Where most guys will say, well, this situation isn't going to work for me. I got to do some, I'm going to not hunt today or whatever. I try to look at it the other way and say, well, it might not be really good for this technique, but on this day, maybe this technique will work really good.
Right, and it's more along the mindset of thinking like the whitetail that you're trying to take. It's thinking like the animal that you're trying to hunt, which we don't always do. A lot of times we want to conceal and hide or get up high or, set up to ambush, or it's pretty cool. That's a more aggressive tactic to mimic the behaviors that they're doing to try to outsmart them. So I guess if we get started into some of this information that you have here, what is the type of gear when you're getting into more tracking, I guess? What's the type of gear that you always bring with you when you're going on these tracking hunts?
Oh, what I carry with me, I always carry something, compasses. I always carry 2 of them. Matter of fact, I've got one now permanently sewed inside my jacket. I can't lose it.
Okay.
I've lost them. I've already lost them. You reach in your pocket for something, you don't realize that you drop your compass. And a compass is a must in the big woods. Without it, I've heard guys say that they always know what direction they're going. They're a better man than me because I don't. I mean, if it's a hazy day, a cloudy day and overcast or whatever, or very little wind, if you don't have the sun or wind to go by, you'll get lost. And plus you're turning every direction when you're tracking. You're going miles and miles and miles and miles. And compasses are a must. You got to study your maps before you go in. What roads you might be able to hit if you go which directions. And you carry those compasses with you. Those are really important. And I've been using my cell phone actually now as my GPS, and that's a really nice time saver because you can walk right back to your vehicle. With a compass, you're going to hit the road, but you may still be a half a mile away from your vehicle or a mile. But with the GPS, it brings you right back. Plus, with the aerial photos on there, a lot of times you can find a trail, an old logging trail or something, and then you can cut across and get on the logging trail. And it's so much easier to walk out on a logging trail than it is to just cut through the woods. Plus you can look for any swamps or wet areas that you're going to run across on your way out, and you can avoid those without having to run into them. You can just look at your aerials on your phone and say, okay, well, I'm going to hit this big swamp here, so I'm going to swing to the north until I, get around the end of it there, and then I can walk right out west and come out to my truck. So GPS.
When you're setting up for those walks, like if you're going out for a day, maybe this is kind of an obvious question, but are you timing, how far or how long you might go in, anticipating that if you start at 5:30 in the morning, that you'll probably cover this much ground, and you want to anticipate that you're going to be able to turn back around and get back by dark, or do you anticipate you'll be walking out, at dark, in the dark, during some walks?
I never worry about it. If I'm way back in and it gets to be later in the day, I'll drop the track and turn back. And at that point, I'll use my GPS to try to find the easiest way out, the quickest way out. In some cases, the quickest way out means a lot of extra miles because you walk out to the nearest road and you walk around on the road. I'd rather walk back to my truck in the dark on a road than I would through the woods. Sure. So I make that decision as to when to turn back when the moment comes. You get to be, if you're 4 miles away from your truck and you're not going to be able to come out to a road or anything, and it's 3 o'clock already and it gets dark at 4:30, you better turn back. You better turn back and you better hump it pretty good if you're going to try to make it out. So I never think about how long I'm going to be in the woods, or I never try to figure out what's going to happen that day. I've jumped on tracks and had the deer laying on the ground so fast it wasn't even funny, and it was like, wow, that was easy. And then I've had tracks where you run over miles and miles and miles and miles, and you never catch up to them. You never freshen them. and so you just never know. Every day is different. Every situation is different. And along those lines, I'll take a track late in the day. I'll take a track at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, knowing it's going to be dark at 4:30. That I got to quit hunting at 4:30. If it's a fairly fresh track, if it's from the night before, how do you know how far he went? He might have only went a half a mile, and he might be laying.
Right.
Right. And the big ones tend to stay laid down all day. And if you get on a track and you push hard, you might get lucky. You never know. You can't. My saying is you don't get 100% of the ones you don't track.
Right. So since this is a tracking, you're moving quite a bit. You're going up and down terrain. So do you bring, extra clothes, warmer clothes that you can put on in the event that you get turned around or it's longer? You kind of wear the same type of clothing, shirts, outfits, so you're prepared.
I don't bring extra clothes. If anything, I'll be pulling clothes off as I go. The general rule of thumb is if you don't feel like you're freezing to death before you started, you dress too warm.
Okay.
And because when you're moving steady, I'm by no means a person that stays real warm easily. There's other guys in t-shirts and shorts when I've got my long underwear on yet. So I don't stay warm easy. But when you're moving constantly steady, you don't need much on. You need a little layer over the top, and then like a t-shirt, and then very light, like a long underwear layer, and then pants, and that's enough. Otherwise you're going to get hot. You get hot, you sweat, you quit. You'll quit if you get warm. You won't go far. You'll go about a mile, and you'll be all beat up and tired, and you'll say enough is enough. Yeah. So the only thing I ever carry extra is gloves. And I'll touch on that in a little bit here. But anyway, getting back to the list of things that I carry with me: compasses and a GPS. Those two things are really important. I carry a knife. I carry the cheapest little bitty, short-bladed, lightweight knife I can. Now, for me, it's all about how much gear can I carry without carrying very much weight. Everything is as lightweight as I can go with it. So I carry a cheap little chintzy pocket knife, just enough so that I can cut them open and gut them. I carry two methods for starting a fire. I've got the magnesium, and then I carry a Bic lighter. And the Bic lighters, don't risk your life on them because they have a tendency that even if there's fluid in them, they don't like to work. I used to be a smoker. I've had the flints come out of them. The springs break on them. They're not a very dependable fire starting method, but they throw a nice flame if you put them up high. And if they don't fail on you, it's a really good way to get a fire started quick. So I carry the two things, the magnesium and the Bic lighter. Then my GPS cell phone, flashlight. Always carry a flashlight. Carry batteries for it as well, extra batteries. Shells, of course. I carry a sling, but I don't sling my gun. My sling goes in my pack. I carry my gun in my hand all the time. I want it to be ready.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
I'll sling it when I'm walking out. If I'm walking out, or if I, got my deer or whatever, then I'll put the sling on it. One thing I did notice with a sling, and other people could try this and see if they notice this too. Go to the rifle range and put your sling on, and if you don't wrap your arm in the sling, actually, which you don't have time to do when you're tracking, you pull your gun up. Watch what your gun does. Your sling will swing back and forth, and it will actually pull your gun back and forth as you're trying to put it on target.
Sure, so I can believe that.
I don't like to have it on there because of that. It's in the way, and it actually swings back and forth, and it pulls your gun a little bit. So I just keep it. I run a carbine, and easy to handle, no scope, and and I just go lightweight with it. And then the sling, if I'm done for the day or whatever, come out to a road, then I'll put the sling on, and then I don't have to carry it anymore. So I carry that separate. I carry a little bit of food. I make myself a couple sandwiches, granola bars, high fat foods. I like candy bar, that kind of thing. Just something to munch once in a while. A little bit of food in you. I don't carry a lot, but just a little bit, and something to drink. And the second reason for the food is too, if I ever get trapped, something happens or whatever, then I got a little bit to eat at least.
Sure.
I have to stay overnight, and something to drink, which at times I've got to the point where I don't even take anything to drink. I just grab snow off the branches as I'm going along, and that almost seems to be enough for me. There's snow on the ground, which there always is when you're tracking. There's always snow to drink, so I've done that as well.
Yeah.
And a camera. The last thing, it's not important, but I like to bring a camera. I like taking pictures. I'm serious about trying to track down a big buck, but if I see something cool, I stop and take a picture of it. And I enjoy the hunt as well. A lot of times I'll take pictures of rubs that he made, or scrapes that he made, or pictures of other wildlife. I got a really cool picture of a huge pine tree that got exploded by lightning, and I got some really cool pictures of that. And you wouldn't want to walk back in there again to get that picture, but if you carry a camera with you, you just take those pictures as you go.
Sure.
So
sure.
I love carrying a camera with me too. So, and that's it. That's pretty basically it. I keep it very simple, and if I could whittle that down, I would as well, because weight is weight, and every step you take, and with the miles, and I'm not a young man anymore, so I try to keep it lightweight and basic.
So you have in here listed with your gun, you said whatever you can shoot fast with, lightweight. Do you specifically practice, I guess, walking on pace, on cadence, and bringing your gun up and shooting when you're at the range, or have you just kind of grown into that method through the years of hunting like this?
I'm amazed at how good I actually shoot quickly, because I've always been one to really be careful and take careful aim. I used to be a stand hunter back home, and a buck would come and I would pick my shot and wait and be very patient, and now I have to shoot within a second to 2 seconds. And so it's a different ball game. But what I have done is I don't spend a lot of time at the range shooting quick, but when I do get to the range, I do shoot quick. But I try to acquire targets really quickly when I'm tracking. If I see a bird, I'll pull on him. If I see a chipmunk, I'll pull on him. Every so often, I'll just pull the gun up quickly on something. I'll try to, acquire that target really quickly, and it works. You don't have to necessarily squeeze off a shot in order to get quick. It's just repetitive practice of getting the gun up quick and getting lined up, and here's another thing too. I kind of shoot my gun almost like a shotgun. It happens so fast. I'm really not aiming. I'm not really centering the pin in the back sight, and it happens so fast. So I would say that if you want to know if your gun is set up well for quick shooting, shoulder your gun really quick with your eyes closed, and then open your eyes and see if you're lined up. And if you're not, you may want to consider changing guns to get something that lines up better when you shoulder it.
Right,
because that's how you really... Go ahead.
Well, and you're using open sights, right?
Right. Yeah. You're not gonna get much time. And you can't be really fussy on your shots. So you want to get a bullet into that deer, and if you're gonna wait for a deer to stand there broadside and with a bullseye painted on his side, good luck. It's not going to happen. Most of the time, the deer knows that you're there before you know he's there. It's just a matter of he checks up long enough for you to get that opportunity. And then when he finally decides that he's had enough and he blows out, that's when you see him. And you got to be quick. You don't get much time. So you have to be good at it. If you can practice, yes, definitely. The better you can be at moving targets and being quick, that's great. Another thing too, when it comes to the gun and quick shooting, what I've learned is a lot of these guns have a recoil pad on the back, on the butt of the gun. A lot of those are soft, rubbery material, and they'll catch up when you try to shoulder really quick. They'll catch up in your armpit as you're bringing it up.
Sure.
So I like the guns that do not have any padding on the back of them, just a hard plastic, but you bring it up and it slides. It doesn't hook or catch on anything. So that's just another thing that, that from a speed standpoint, my muzzle loader, my carbine muzzle loader has that pad on it, and I don't like it. And if there was anything I could do to change it, I would, but I don't think there's much I can do with it. So I live with it as it is. But it's so short anyway, I haven't had a problem with it hooking up on me yet. So.
Yeah, it seems like a guy's going to want to get practice in if he can, but it's to the point where it's instinctual. I mean, it sounds to me like you've built an instinctual habit where you're bringing your gun up and you know that it's on. It feels like it's in the right position. Where you mentioned you're shooting it kind of like a shotgun, where it's instinctual. It's up, it's in that position, and you know you're on.
Right. That's basically what it comes down to. Well, I ran the non-carbine. I got a 30-06, the 7600. It's the pump. I ran that ever since I was a kid, and then I got the carbine model, which is the same exact gun, except for the barrel's just cut off about 2.5 inches. So I'm so familiar with the gun. The gun just, I don't even realize what I'm doing when I shoot. It just comes up and my safety comes off. I don't remember taking the safety off, things like that. And when I pump or whatever, it's just natural. I've been running that gun for so many years that it's natural. I could never switch to like a bolt. Boy, I think I'd be lost trying to run through the cycle of a bolt and get another shot off. But if you've run a bolt your whole life, you'd probably be quicker than me, maybe.
Sure.
Sure. It's just what you're used to and what you can be quick with. That's something you're familiar with. I know when I switched over to the muzzle loader, as I was following tracks, I was telling myself over and over again 1,000,000 times, pull the hammer back, pull the hammer back, pull the hammer back, pull the hammer back, because I know that I'm not used to doing that. And surprisingly, I did shoot one with my muzzle loader, and I don't remember pulling the hammer back, but I did. So, that repetitive, telling myself to do it over and over and over again, I guess it must have worked. It was something that just happened and it worked. So,
no,
again, you have to be quick.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, that's exactly what I think guys have to think about. And some guys don't do that without enough practice, and it's more mechanical. So when that buck of a lifetime shows up in front of them, they're consciously thinking, grab my gun, switch off the safety, put it to my shoulder, focus the scope, or whatever they need to do, because they haven't practiced it enough where it's instinctual, where they just know what to do and they go through the steps without thinking about it. So, yeah, that's great advice and good example of why you need to do that.
Yeah, I'm going to back us up on this a little bit here, and I want to kind of go over to clothing a little bit.
Sure.
It's actually pretty crucial. It's pretty critical, I found. You have to stay dry. Absolutely 100% you have to stay dry. There's going to be a lot of days where you're going to get a snowfall, and then the temperatures are going to come up, and the trees are just dripping, and everything is wet. And even if it's not one of those days, just snow falling on you will accumulate and melt, because you're going to be throwing off a lot of heat. You're moving a lot. Your body's warm. Your clothes are going to be warm. Any snow that gets on you is going to immediately melt, and you'll get soaked. And again, just like getting tired from having too many clothes on, if you get soaking wet, you're going to quit. You're going to quit. You're just going to give up. And when you're soaked right down to your underwear, you quit. You've had enough. It's, you're going to turn back. And so I found it really, really important. I waterproof all my outer layers. I've got a product that I use called Nick Wax, I believe. You dump it right in your wash machine. It looks like milk. And you soak your clothes in there for a little while, and then you dry them, and they repel water real well, at least for a while. So waterproof. If you can buy waterproof layers, that's even better yet, something that's factory waterproof. But you have to stay. I like to wear a coat that's like down past my waist onto my thighs, because that helps to shed things down off of me and keep my pants dry. And so everything's got to be waterproof. I took a baseball cap and I sewed a flap to the back of it so it rides down my back. And then when I duck underneath branches and the snow falls down, it hits that flap and it just is deflected down. It's miserable every time you duck under a branch to have a pile of snow go down the back of your neck.
Yeah.
And so I sewed a flap on the back of my hat, and when I don't need it, I flip it up inside the hat and put it on and go. And then when I need it, I flip it out, and then I'm good to go. And so some kind of a flap, a deflector flap, was really nice on a regular, like, baseball style cap is what I run. Do not wear a stocking cap if you're tracking. You'll be stopping 50 times a day to pick it up off the ground. It gets caught in every branch you go under, and it'll clean it right
I've
off
had
your
that
head.
happen before.
So stay away from the stocking cap style. Go with the baseball cap style or something similar to that. That won't get knocked off with every branch you go underneath. And then my layers, again, if you think you're freezing to death when you're standing outside your truck getting ready to go, then you're probably just right. I guess let me start from the bottom and go up. I wear the knee-high rubber boots. I run the lacrosses simply because they fit me the best. And fit to me is important. I'll go down to a big chain store. I'll grab 8-10 boxes of the same boot, and I will try on all the rights and all the lefts. And when I find a right and a left that fit me really good, I put them together in this one box and I buy it. And just so you know, they allow that. They don't have a problem with that as long as you don't mix sizes, as long as you don't put a 9 with an 8 or something like that. I've never had anybody bother me on it, and I've told them what I'm doing, so I know that they're comfortable with that. And I've never had anybody, give me any static about it. They just say, just don't mix sizes. So, and believe it or not, and take the sock you're going to wear with you when you do that, because fit is crucial. You're going to be walking miles and miles and miles in these boots. They're going to be your best friend. It's not uncommon for me to put over 100 miles on during a tracking season. And so fit is important. If your feet are sore, you're going to quit walking. And
now, do you typically wear a wool sock? I know you mentioned using wool for your under layers.
Yeah, I wear like a regular cotton sock underneath and then a wool sock over top of that, and into my boot, and that's what I run. My feet have a tendency to sweat a lot, so I do that just because of how much my feet sweat. I'm thinking about getting away from the cotton layer and going with some other fabric, because that will get cold if you stop moving at all. You get cold quick once you get sweated up.
Right.
But that's what I'm running right now. Right now it's working for me, and that's what I'm going to stick with for now at least. But yeah, just a cotton sock and then a wool sock over the top and your boot. And again, whatever you're going to wear hunting, take that to the store with you, and try your boot on with that, and then walk around the store. Put on some miles in the store, walk around and around and around, and just see how your feet feel in them. See how, after you take 400 or 500 steps in them, what, if you can feel any pressure points or anything. Because like I said, you'll notice if you do this that every boot, they're all made the same, but every one is different. So I get pretty picky about trying to get a good fit. So, and then from there on up, I wear a really light pair of long underwear, and I simply do that just more for the fact that my pants are probably going to get wet at some point, and it just gives me a layer of protection between my skin and my outer pant. I don't really need it. It's probably almost too warm, so I go with a very, very light underwear. And then I go with wool pants, a real lightweight wool pant. Matter of fact, I've got a suit that, I can't think of his name now. I got it from Lou. He was working with somebody on the Beast there. I had him make me a special suit for it, and I've been running that now for about 3 years now. But anything soft, anything supple, you got to have, when you're walking along, if the branches are slapping your legs and you can hear that noise, that's not good. So if you want something very soft, something very quiet. Matter of fact, I would almost like to figure out a way to line my boots because that when the branches hit them rubber boots, they make a lot of noise. And I've been thinking about trying to figure out a way to even line my boots on the outside with something.
Yeah, like a felt material or something that'll dampen the whack of the noise when it hits them.
Yeah. The other issue with that though is when the temperatures drop and you hit in the water, every time you get any water on you, like if you step into a swamp or something, you come out, that freezes right away, and then that gets really noisy, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. The better you waterproof, the better, the less that'll stay on there. But you'll gather ice on there throughout the day, and it's kind of a bummer. There's nothing you can really do about it. You can't even chip it off or nothing. You can knock the bigger clumps off, but if it's one of those days where it's going to freeze on there, it's going to freeze on there, and you just got to live with it, I guess. I haven't come up with a better idea yet, but that's what I do for now, at least. And in the upper layer, there's a lot of days I just go with the lightweight jacket and a t-shirt. And if it's 25, 30 degrees, 20 degrees out, you don't need any more than that. If you're walking steady, you're just not going to get cold. And so that's what I do for the upper. And then, of course, the hat. Like I said, I wear the baseball-style cap with the flap on the back. And, again, I'm going to stress waterproofing. Gloves, that's a big thing. I've been experimenting with gloves for years and years and years, and I finally found something that I kind of like. And matter of fact, I made an addition to that this year. Overall, what I found, if it's wet conditions, the best way to go so far, and I've bought expensive waterproof gloves, neoprene rubber gloves. I've spent so much money on different gloves trying them. And what I've come back to was a pair of brown jersey gloves, and then over the top of that, on the wet days, put these examining gloves like the doctor uses. Just rubber gloves. Yep. And then what I do is I'll take like 3 pairs of the brown jersey gloves and a couple pairs of the rubber gloves, and I'll throw them in my pack. And if they do get wet, then I just switch them out and keep going. And I did find this year some rubber gloves that come down your arm further, so it'll actually cover all the way over the top of the brown jersey glove cuff. And I think that's going to be fantastic now, because now the cuff won't even get wet. So I think with those new rubber gloves, if I don't get a hole in them, I think I'll stay very dry. And they're thin enough that you can still operate your gun. And that's another thing too. Make sure that if you're going to wear gloves, that you can operate your gun. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to operate a gun when you got a little thicker pair of gloves on.
Well, and that factors into your acquiring the target quickly and being able to react too. If you're fumbling around with the glove, or you have to take your glove off even to do it, that could be that split second that you're not going to be able to get the target in line.
Yeah, and you're going to get that. You're going to get, a second, 2 seconds. That's 2 seconds is actually a long time. So it's gotta happen fast. And like I said, if you've got gloves that are just too thick, you can't get your finger in there and on the trigger, and or whatever the case. It's got to be lightweight enough that you can still operate your gun. But that's what I found the best is just the brown jersey gloves with the neoprene rubber or latex rubber examining gloves over the top. Very lightweight, very cheap. You can buy the brown jersey gloves. You can buy them in big packs for under $1 a pair. And the examining gloves, I just bought a box of, I don't know how many are in there, like 50 gloves or something like that. I think it was like $15.
Yeah, it's
and
cheap.
I paid more than that for a single pair of gloves. I think the most I've ever paid for a pair of gloves was almost $50, and I don't even use them.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. I've tried a lot of different types of glove combinations that are waterproof and ones that you can still shoot with, like you mentioned, where you still get that tactile use of your hands and but keep you warm and dry. And I agree, there's no perfect method out there, but it seems like a good one that you've come up with, especially when you're mobile and you're moving around quite a bit.
And to take it a step further, I actually throw the brown jersey gloves in with my waterproofing when I do them, and I waterproof them as well, which helps. But anything that has a lot of wear and tear on it, like your hands or whatever, that waterproofing doesn't last real long. And to be honest with you, on them jersey gloves, that waterproofing doesn't work the best anyway. But it helps.
Yeah, and the advantage of using the waterproofing wax on your clothing material too. I've used that stuff for camping as opposed to using a lot of what's out there for waterproofing. I mean, it's fairly expensive to get a breathable, high quality waterproof jacket or underlayer. So a lot of times you end up overheating because the material's not breathable. But with the wax, you can literally use that on any type of garment that you have. And as long as you're treating it every so often, it works pretty good.
Yeah, I do mine every year, whether they need it or not. That's just one of my rituals. Before I head up north to do my hunting, I do all my clothes, bring them all out, and waterproof them all again, and then I'm good to go. And it really works. That Nick wax that I use, that really, you can when you first have something treated with it, like a shirt, you can actually make a puddle in your shirt and fill it with water and let it sit in there for a while and just dump it right out, and your shirt is dry. It's amazing. Over time it wears off, but at least from the very beginning, it's amazing how well it repels water. I do my hat, everything. I throw everything in there, and like I said, if you get wet, you're going to quit. Maybe you're somebody that can really tolerate that better than me, but there's nothing more miserable than being soaked. And if you stop moving even for a few minutes, you start to freeze right away. And it's a mental thing. It's a mental thing. And if you're hungry, if you're tired, if you're cold or wet or overheated, all these things weigh on your mind, and eventually you turn back. And sometimes I'll get on a buck and I'll go and go and go, and I'll think I went all day on him, and I'll check my GPS and I went 2 miles, and it's like, oh really? That's all the further I went? So it's a long way in, it's a long way back out. So
Yeah.
You have to be willing, to not worry about how far you went, or and you want to be comfortable as you possibly can. And I know that I watched the Benoit videos, and these guys get right in the water and they cross these rivers. I stay dry. I won't get wet unless it's an accident. I stay dry. Usually I can find a way to get across the river. If I head up or downstream a half a mile or so, there'll be a tree fell across, or there'll be rocks that you can cross on or something. I'm not going to get wet. I think it's a safety hazard as well. If something happens to you and you're soaking wet, hypothermia can kick in pretty quick.
Sure.
So I try to stay as dry as I can and avoid going in.
So how about we transition into more of your setup or your preparation for tracking, and kind of go into how you pick a track once you get to an area. I know you've kind of touched on how you look at maps and some aerials and how you go about picking an area. I don't know if you want to cover that a little bit more than going into how you decide to get on a particular track and move on it.
Well, as far as picking out a track, I look for a big one. I mean, plain and simple. I want to find a really good track, and the simple, easy reasoning for that is you're going to run into other deer all day long. He's going to go to and run into where other deer walked, and if you've got a decent track and you run into an area and there's a couple of other decent deer there, it's really hard to know that you're staying with the same track. If you've got a really, really good track, you won't know you're on him yet. You just don't get messed up. You might get messed up for a little while or whatever, but you'll always find that track because it's just so big. It just stands out much more than the other ones. So, and it's an effort. You're putting a lot of effort in it. You're putting your whole hunt in on that day on that track. I've got to the point now where if I don't find that track, I just don't go. I'll spend all day looking for a track, and if I don't find a good one, I won't. I'm not going to chase a average deer track all day anymore. I used to do it when I was first learning. It was experience. Any experience you can gain is great, but if I can't find a really good one, I don't. And a good one depends on where you're at. Minnesota, them deer have bigger feet. I don't know why. I don't ever understood it. You come to Wisconsin, they're average. I go up to the UP, they're smaller. I don't know why, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
You have to base the size of your track on the area that you're hunting in as well. But I know the guys use a system of 3 fingers, 4 fingers, or whatever. I basically use a 30-06 shell to kind of get an idea where I'm at if I really need to measure it. I've looked at so many of them now. I really don't. I mean, when I see the track I want to take, I know I want to take that deer, right? I don't have to pull a shell out and measure it or anything. I know that that's a good deer. So that's basically how I do it. I do a lot of driving, looking for tracks, but I will go in too if I know there's a big buck in an area, and I've been on him in years past, and I know his travel routes. I'll hike in a quarter mile and cut through an area where I know he likes to cross and see if I can't pick him up. I'll do that if other things aren't panning out. I'll get in there and do that. Sometimes I'll take a average track for a while just to get out and stretch my legs for a while. And what I'm really looking for is to run across a bigger track. And sometimes that pays off. Sometimes you'll follow a smaller buck and he'll lead you to a bigger one. Matter of fact, I've had it happen a lot of times. And a lot of times these bigger bucks are road shy. So sometimes that technique works too to find a track, is to just follow deer, go where other deer go. So
now you mentioned in here that you typically want to use the smallest track in a series of tracks kind of as your guide for size. What do you consider? I mean, you just mentioned that you might take a medium or average size track. What number of tracks do you consider a series? Like, how far will you go? Are we talking 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 tracks that are in, of similar footing, or how many tracks are you looking at that you consider a series?
Well, it depends on the situation. It depends on the snow depth and the consistency of the snow. Sometimes I'll walk a quarter mile on a track before I'll decide whether or not I want to take it.
Okay.
It's just that borderline iffy. I'm not quite sure about it, and maybe it's a little bit deeper snow, powderier snow, and I'm not really getting a good imprint. Sometimes I'll follow a quarter mile and go underneath the pine tree where, of course, the snow will be a little bit less deep because the pine limbs will catch the snow, and then you'll get that 1 or 2 really nice looking tracks to really get a good gauge as to what he is. And again, sometimes it's the depth too. Sometimes it's the depth that he's stepping. Sometimes you can get a deer with a smaller track, but he really punches in. And if you find one of those, once you've looked at a lot of tracks, you start to see those things. You start to see, boy, this deer digs in a little bit more. And sometimes it'll be unique. And when you get on your track, when you decide to take your track, really study that track, that individual track. Not only, it's big, but his on his left side, the outside toe curls in front of the inside toe. On the other side, it's just the opposite. Well, then every time you see that track, not only that day, but any time in the future, you'll remember that that's the same buck. And that helps you stay with them that day, and it'll also help you relocate them other times. You might find that same deer 4 miles over, and you'll see that track, and you'll say, "Oh yeah, I've been on this one before. I've seen this one before." So,
I suppose now with a camera or a cell phone, you could probably take a picture and use that as a reference point as you move on throughout.
Yeah, and a lot of guys break a little stick and put it in their pocket for the width and so forth. But again, getting back to that the smallest track in a series, the reason I do that is because they'll fool you. It's a long stride. He's walking. Oh, he's a real long deer because it's a long stride. No, he's in a hurry. He's picked up his pace a little bit, so he's taking longer steps. He may slow down to his normal walk, and then all of a sudden his gait isn't quite so long. And every deer, like every person, they walk a little bit different. One deer will always step just outside of his front foot with his hind foot, and then what happens is that track looks really wide. And he always does that, so he looks like he's got a huge foot. But then if you follow him long enough, you'll find where he stepped off or turned or something, and you can see the front and the hind, and then you'll say, "Oh, he isn't as big as I thought he was."
Right.
So a series of tracks could be a quarter mile. It could be a half a mile. It could be as much or as little as a dozen tracks to get a good feel. Especially if you're driving on a road and you see a track come across. A lot of times deer are skittish by the roads, and they move across the road quite quickly. And they can pound down pretty hard and make it look big, but they're really not. And then when you get into the woods a ways and follow them, you find that out. You say, "Well, gee, he ain't, he isn't what I thought he was." And believe me, it's worth taking the time to really judge your tracks, because again, you're putting a lot of effort into it. You're going to come back at the end of the day dragging. You're going to be exhausted. Why do that on a deer that's not something you want to even shoot if you caught him?
Right.
It doesn't make sense to do that. So pick your tracks wisely. I've done it, and you can ask the hodag hunter. I was out with him one day, and we followed a deer for a long time, and it squatted and peed, and then we started laughing. I said, "We've been following a doe." So pick your tracks wisely. Look them over. Really, really take the time to really burn your eyes into them. Really look them over, and that takes years. The more tracks you look at, the better you're going to get at it, and that's something that only experience can teach you. You have to just go out and look at a lot of them, and so picking a track. Again, I know I made mention of this on the Beast. A tired buck will lay back and lay his dues a lot harder, which makes his foot splay out wider, and he'll look really huge. But I've seen on many occasions where that deer will lay down and he rests up, and when he gets up, he walks away, and he walks up on his toes because he's not tired anymore. And it's like you wouldn't believe it's the same deer. You would say, "Boy, that's not the same deer." And you kind of look around and you say, what happened here? And it's like, yeah, that's the same deer. They can be that different. Their track can change that drastically from when they're very tired versus when they're rested up.
Sure, that makes
so
sense.
Again,
They're being
the more you study the track, or the longer you take it, the more you'll learn about that particular deer and just how good he is. And again, a buck, just because he's got a bigger track, doesn't necessarily mean he's a monster deer. He could just have big feet. But it equates to a big deer. If you've got a big track, it usually equates to a big deer. And so I guess I say that, but if I saw a really, really good track, I'm going to take him. I'm going to find out. I tracked one in Michigan. I've got pictures of them. I took him with the muzzleloader. I found his track coming across the road, and I looked at the maps, and I had another road coming up a ways up, so I drove down to the end, and to see if I could catch him crossing at the other road there. And sure enough, he crossed over there too. So then at that point, he was going into the middle of nowhere. So I grabbed the track and I went. I caught up to him really quick, and there he laid. He didn't even know I was there. I'm standing 60 yards away from him. He's bedded down looking back at me, and he doesn't even see me. And I'm thinking that can't be my deer, because it was a scrubby little 7-pointer. And I leaned my muzzleloader up against my leg, and I got my camera out, and I took some pictures of him while he was laying there, and then I spooked him up, and I took some pictures as he ran away. And then afterwards, I followed his track, and he went up and he did a J hook, and he laid down underneath the cedar tree there. That was him. But he had a heck of a track, but he didn't have anything for horns.
Right.
So you'll get food, you know. And that's another thing too. You know, if you're going to be a tracker, you're not going to be a scorer. You don't try to score a deer when you're tracking. You take a track, and you know, I mean, if you get an opportunity like I had that day, you can see that he definitely isn't something you want to shoot. But in most cases, you're going to blow this deer up. You have to decide if you want to shoot him and shoot within a second or two. So, you know, you're not going to be scoring these deer. You're not going to, you gotta make your mind up. Well, I'm going to shoot at this deer when, you know, if I get him up, and if you walk up to him and he ain't quite what you thought he was, well, then you shot yourself a buck and put your tag on it and be happy.
Right. Good stuff. So do you want to talk any more about aging a track, or does that go back to?
Yeah, we could. Yeah, because that's pretty important too. There's a lot to that. There's a lot of information on that. I pay attention to what's happening all night long before I go out the next day. If there's snow coming, I want to know when it came. I want to know when it quit. Because if it quits at midnight and I catch a track, I know he's only from midnight on ahead of me. If it stops snowing at 6 o'clock that evening, then I know he could be, you know, much further away. And then the next day it doesn't snow, so now you've got a set of tracks from 2 days out there, and you have to be able to tell which track was made last night and which one was made the night before. And then it gets even more difficult the third day. And you have to start looking at these tracks. Again, you burn your eyes into them and really look at those little keys. They deteriorate. They melt. Even if it's not above freezing, they melt. If the sun comes out, they melt. They change a little bit. Each day they change a little bit. And the only way you can learn that is by being out there and studying tracks. Matter of fact, if you have a deer hoof laying around and you've got snow in your yard and you want to learn, go out and make some tracks of snow and then watch it each day. Watch how it changes when the sun hits it. Watch how it changes overnight the next day. Watch how little crystals, ice form in it overnight if you get frost. You know, and then again too, he had it out and it was soft yet. The snow hadn't froze, but overnight it froze. And now you're tracking this deer. Well, now it's getting to be noon and it's getting above freezing again. Well, you're taking this track. You can tell just about how far that deer is ahead of you in hours by looking at how the track is. Was the track laid in the evening before it froze? You know, a really pretty print, real distinct print, or is it after it started to crystal over and now it's more crunchy? Or
Right.
You know, or when you come across his bed. Now he came in and his tracks were kind of crunchy because it was froze when he went and laid down. But when he got up, now his tracks are really well defined in the snow, which means, well, it's noon now and it warmed up. He must have got up not too long ago because he's walking on the softer melted snow now. You know, and you got to watch how the age of that track changes when you're on them, and you have to watch before you decide to take that track to determine how old that track is. And another thing too, you'll drive around and you'll see tracks, and after the 2 or 3 days, and every track looks monstrous. It's like, wow, look at that track, you know, and you get out and look at it. Well, a track melts from the inside out, which means it keeps getting bigger. As it melts, it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the difference between a medium track and a large track isn't all that much. So it doesn't have to melt much. It doesn't have to deteriorate too much before all of a sudden it looks like a really big track. So, aging a track is really important, but again, you can't learn that in a book. You have to learn that in the field, and by the more years you put into it, the more you'll learn.
Sure. I mean, it makes perfect sense what you're talking about. I guess I would have never thought about it that way. I mean, the change in how the track is laid down throughout the day, yeah, that could really correlate and tell you when this buck's been moving, because your example's perfect, like really well-defined, crisp tracks in the softer snow, but then, yeah, we've all seen those types of tracks where they look like they just busted through ice, right? Where it's more punched through. And yeah, that's a really good tip.
I mean, I stop and I check the tracks if they go through water where they broke the ice. I want to see if the ice reformed again.
Mm-hmm.
Did they come through long enough ago that the ice reformed again, or you reach down in there and it hasn't froze over yet, and it's 15 degrees out. He isn't too far ahead of me. The one I shot in Michigan with my muzzleloader, he got out of his bed and he went a little ways and he pooped. I reached down. It was 18 degrees that day, and I grabbed his poop and I squeezed it to soft, just like butter. And I got excited then because I knew he was right in front of me. He had to be right in front of me because that poop was still so soft it hadn't froze yet. And at 18 degrees, when he poops on the snow like that, it can't take, I would say, no more than 15, 20 minutes, I don't know, before it would freeze.
Sure. Yeah, I was actually just thinking about asking you that, if they poop or if they pee, and that you come upon that as you're tracking, you can use, the temperature of that or how fresh it is to determine their distance out as well.
Oh, definitely. And here's another thing you can do too. Buck urine really stinks, but it changes over time and it gets weaker and weaker. The longer it lays on the ground, the weaker it gets. So get down on your hands and knees, stick your face down there, smell it. See how strong it is. And if it's really strong, it's fairly fresh. And the only way you'll learn that is by getting down and smelling a bunch of it. And then you'll find out that I mean, it sounds funny, but why not use something that, is to your advantage?
Right.
And it does change. Now I don't crawl on the ground. I reach down and I just scoop it up with my glove and I smell it. And I want to see how strong it really is. And then I move on, and I've learned a lot by doing that. Just how fast it changes. And I can't put that verbally out to you. I can't tell you how strong it is after 1 hour or 8 hours or 12 hours, but my nose can tell me. And so the only way you'll know is if you start doing that, and then you'll find out. You'll say, "Wow, this is very, very strong. It's really fresh."
Well, the one thing I'm picking up on as I listen to you talk about the attention to detail on picking the track and on the trail and using the obviously tactile sense of the poop, the smell of the urine. I mean, you're somewhat behaving like, I shouldn't say somewhat, I mean you are behaving like a predator would behave if they were tracking, like may it be a coyote or a wolf. If they're on this deer and they're tracking it, they're using their sense of smell, their eyesight, their replication of what the track looks like and the trail looks like to find that deer.
Well, I've already smelled them before I shot them. Which sounds funny, but yeah. I shot one in Minnesota that I smelt them before I shot him, and so I was ready for him because I knew he was right there. I knew he was laying down right in front of me somewhere. I had the wind in my favor, and I could smell him. And you know how a buck is when you shoot them during the rut; they stink.
Yeah.
So if the wind is in your favor, it's possible.
Well, I think it speaks to too, guys, really being in tune with your surroundings when you're in the woods. And I think maybe some newer guys or younger guys getting into the sport don't always think of that, about really paying attention to the different sounds, different smells, what the wind's doing, and things like that. Put yourself in the mindset of a predator tracking its prey.
Yeah, and what I've learned over the years is, as I've become better and better at it, which, by the way, I'm a long way from being good at it yet. I mean, there's so much more to learn. And but I look back at when I started and where I am today, and I equate it to, I don't know if you've ever heard, they talk about a rookie quarterback. The game is really fast, and after they gain experience, it slows down for them. When they back up into the pocket, they take that snap, everything is moving so fast that it's kind of a blur for them. But then after they become veteran quarterbacks, they take the snap. It's the same amount of time elapsed, but they have time to look to third, fourth receivers, and they know who's coming and rushing from where, and everything kind of slows down for them. And that's what I've noticed in my tracking is I missed so much stuff when I first started tracking, because all I was doing is following a footprint in the snow. And I really wasn't paying attention to all the things that was being conveyed to me by the tracks and the things that were going on around me. But as I'm gaining experience, I'm starting to see those little details now that I missed before. And as you gain experience, you're going to start seeing those things if you're paying attention. And you can use those for your advantage, knowing, scooping up that pee and smelling it, try squeezing that poop to see if it's froze yet. Looking at the track, I can't tell you how many times I've been following a track, and then all of a sudden it's dawned on me, hey, this track has changed. He's walking in soft snow now. I wonder how long ago that happened. I don't even remember noticing the change. But now I do. I see those things. As soon as the track changes, I notice it. And, and I keep mental notes of what time when I'm walking, let's say at 10 o'clock in the morning, when I'm walking, all of a sudden the snow started to get soft. So if I'm following him and all of a sudden his track starts to get soft, I know he was there at 10 o'clock.
Sure.
And it gives you an idea of how far away he might be from you yet. And when I say how far away, I'm talking in time, not in distance, because he could be only 20 feet ahead of you. He could be 4 miles away, depending on if he decided to move real fast or if he just laid back down. So right. It's just a time. It's a time gauge, not a distance gauge. Mm-hmm. And here's another thing too that I've never seen anybody else talk about or anything, but I've noticed it so many times now. It's really worth noting. If you're tracking and you come across an empty bed, be on guard. Get ready. Because I've had so many times where they'll bed down and then they get up and they wander over a little ways. They'll pee, they'll poop, they'll nibble a little stuff, and they'll lay right back down again. And a lot of times I find 3-4 beds, 2-3 beds, and then they might not be in any of them, but I find multiple beds right there. And I have blown numbers of deer out of the second, third bed to the point where now when I see a bed, I'm on red alert because I know that there's a good chance he's right here yet, very close.
Sure.
And so, if you come across the bed and it's empty, don't be disillusioned by that, or don't let your focus be pulled away by that fact. Matter of fact, if you find an empty bed, really be on alert because there's a really good chance he could be there yet. I followed one with my muzzleloader back home here, laid the muzzleloader in the bed, took pictures of it. I'm goofing around there and, whatever. And finally I decided I'll get back on the track again. And I didn't walk 30, 40 feet and I blew him up. And I never even got a shot off at him. I had my muzzleloader. You get one chance. And I waited for that right shot and I just never got the bead on him well. And I never even pulled the shot off. I never fired the gun. But, again, a lesson learned. All that time I'm goofing around there and my buck is laying just a little ways away from me and I never knew it.
Sure.
And I've had it happen so many times. So when you guys come across one, be on alert because he could be there yet.
So you have some other general stuff listed on your notes here about tracking. Move fast, watch side to side. Um, you covered being ready for an empty bed. What are some other things? Do you want to talk about any of those in more detail?
Yeah. I could kind of go down that list a little bit. Moving fast. He could be 6 miles away from you. He could be more than that away from you. Go. Don't hesitate. Just go. Just go. Matter of fact, I think sometimes it works in your favor the faster you can move, because if you think about it, he probably makes an error that allows you to get up on him in the first place. Maybe he's rubbing a tree. Maybe he got up and he's pawing in the ground. Maybe he's distracted by other deer that happen to be crossing at that very moment. I've had all these things happen. So if you're moving very slow, he's got a lot more time to catch you moving in. If you're moving fast, you close that distance quicker, from the distance where he can't see you because of the cover to where you get to where you can shoot him. The faster you move, the faster you close that gap. Now there's a speed where you really can't watch everything that's going on either. So, and I don't run and I don't jog, but I move as fast as I can.
Right.
And I found it to work in my favor. I found it, and for two reasons. One reason is you close that gap a lot quicker, and I think you get a chance to take him by surprise. And the second thing is you don't know how far away he is, and the day is only so long. You'll run out of daylight before you'll catch him many times. More than not, I just run out of daylight. I've got to go back, and so I go as fast as I can, and I think it's better to go too fast and then make a mistake that you didn't see him because you were moving too fast than it is to walk all day and end up turning back when you're only a mile away from him because you ran out of time.
Right.
So I've just learned to move as fast as I can and let the chips fall where they may. Moving too slow is gonna send you back to your truck many nights without ever catching them. So go as fast as you can and still be aware of your surroundings. And another thing too, to kind of go along with that too, is there's like a zone or an ease of doing it. You can't be on red alert all the time. You'll burn yourself out. You can't be like you're in a war and guys are going to jump out and shoot you every second, because you'll be so nerved up, you'll burn yourself out mentally. So there's like an ease, a flow of it. You refer to like a predator. You got to almost become like that predator. You just move through the woods, and you're relaxed but focused, and then you'll catch them. You'll catch them getting up. You'll get that shot. But if you're tense all the time, it'll burn you out mentally. So and it's a hard thing to do. I mean, you're keyed up. You're on that track. You think it's a natural response to be on edge or to be really too keyed up. But try to relax and stay focused, relaxed and focused. Try not to worry about anything else that's going on in your life or anything else that's happening or whatever. Just stay focused on what you're doing and relax and with ease go through the woods.
You have
watching side to side.
Yeah, go ahead.
Watching side to side, they change course all the time. They're constantly zigzagging here and there and whatever the case. So if you're not watching side to side, if your focus is forward, you're going to miss them a lot of times. Plus, most of the time, they'll do a J hook. So if you're not watching side to side, they're going to let you walk right by them, and then they're going to blow off the side, and you won't get that shot. So no matter what direction the track is going, you got to keep your head looking left and right and center. You got to just keep kind of sweeping the area. You got to keep reminding yourself, to watch the sides, to watch off to the sides. Otherwise, you're going to miss the chance because, like I said, they change courses so often, and then when they lay down there, they almost always do a J hook. So keep not only forward, but be watching your sides a lot.
Sure, sure.
And then the next thing is don't look at the track. Don't be married to that track. That track, you can't shoot the deer when you're looking down. You have to force yourself to not look at the track. Look ahead of you all the time. Be burning that woods, looking for that deer all the time. Don't be looking at the track. And what's going to happen is you're going to lose the track. You're going to end up on the wrong track. Whatever the case, if that happens, then just back up, figure it out, and get back on your track again and go. But if you're standing looking at the track all day, that 1 or 2 second window that opens up to you is going to get blown by the fact you're looking at the ground. You need to keep looking ahead, and otherwise you're not.
So is that, I got to think that that's an experience thing to be able to do that. A couple people I know in the forum post questions, they were asking about low deer density versus high deer density. Is it easier to track if there's lower deer densities where you have, I guess, basically less tracks that you're on? And then I noticed that you have here in your notes too that, stay off the track when there is more than one deer. So are you really trying to focus down to an area where you're tracking a single set of tracks over these long distances?
When the track is a single track cutting through the woods, especially on a day right after a new snow, you don't hardly have to look at it. You can just blow right through the woods. It's so easy. You just glance down and, your eye normally catches it, and you don't have to look down at all hardly.
Sure.
But when he runs into an area where there is a bunch of does and fawns feeding or whatever, get off the track so you don't stomp it down, and slow down, and then start looking. You're going to have to pay more attention to the track itself at that time. I've got to the point now where I kind of know his line of travel, and I usually just kind of keep moving forward because I usually can just bypass a mess and pick them up again pretty easily. You may have a hard time finding each footprint all the way through where a bunch of deer were feeding or something. I tried to do that when I first started. It's very slow and tedious. More what I do now is I kind of just keep going in the general direction, stay off of the tracks as much as I possibly can, and then try to pick them up after he gets through that mess.
Yeah, that makes sense because I guess you studying that track up front, you're really understanding the characteristics of it. You get the general pitch or direction that deer is going in, and then you're trying to move as fast as you can, and then when you need to refocus on the track itself to gain direction again if you get into an area where there's a lot of deer movement and a lot of other tracks. But that kind of speaks to your original comment about really studying the unique characteristics of that track, whether it's toes curling in or out, or what makes that track unique. So yeah, definitely something that you have to learn through experience.
And you're going to lose tracks. You're going to take a track 1.5 miles and you're going to lose it. I still lose tracks. You're just going to get into a mess. If you go to northern Wisconsin or the UP, you got baits. And these bucks, they go from bait to bait to bait all night long looking for hot does. And when they go to a bait area, they came in and they walked over a whole bunch of other tracks, and then a whole bunch of does and fawns fed over the top of them all night long. You come into that, it's a mess. It's a mess. And if you don't, you have to just circle around and sort it out. You have to find his track again. They don't grow wings at a bait station and fly away. He walked out of there. It's your job to find out where he's walked out of there.
Right.
And it can burn time on you, and it can end your day just by the fact that if he hits 4 bait stations and it takes you an hour at each one to sort them out, you're going to run out of time. But again, you have to stick with it. You have to stay, and don't try not to stomp his tracks out when he runs into other deer, and then and try to find him again. He left there somewhere. He went somewhere.
Now, is it typical for you to get on a track. Let's say you track it all day. It's getting close to dark. You haven't jumped him yet. Do you mark that spot, get out, and then the next day continue on with them, or do you just start fresh, coming in new, or what? I guess what makes your decision whether or not you're going to come back and start tracking that deer again the next day, or just move on and try to cut another set of tracks?
That's a funny, brings a funny story up. I very seldom ever go back after a deer. I usually just go and look for a new track. You got to remember, I haven't caught him yet, so I don't know how much further he went that night. Now he's going to get another night yet to go on me. So I would rather look for a track that was made the night before I'm after him.
Sure.
Than to try to go back a day and a half. It just makes my odds lower and lower. So I usually don't. But I tracked one in Wisconsin, and I followed him for a long way. He was a decent buck. He was not a monster. I came across a monster that crossed his path, and I immediately turned and took it. I didn't go 150 yards, and I blew him up. And which, to get back to the previous story, he was in the third bed in a series of 3 beds in a very small area in a circle, maybe 30 yards. He was in the third bed. He bedded, got up, moved, bedded, got up, walked back, circled around, and then went and laid down into a little bit thicker stuff again the third time. And he was in the third bed when I blew him up, and he was a brute. He was one of the biggest tracks I've ever been on, and it was late in the day already, and I was very near the road. And I thought, well, I'm going to pull off him. I'm going to jump on him first thing in the morning and take him. And I stopped at the local watering hole to see what was going on down there and have a few drinks. Guy comes walking in the door and he says, "It's snowing." So there goes my track. It got snowed in on me, and I never, and I was on that deer a few times. I kept watching where he was crossing and stuff because they are very patternable. And I never did get that deer though, but that was one that I would have taken again with the circumstance. He was big enough that he would have been worth it.
Sure. So there's another comment in here. What do you do if you lose a track? I mean, maybe you touched on this a little bit, but
you got to look for it. I mean, you gotta look. The best way I can tell you is, and it can be daunting at times because if there's a lot of other deer tracks, that's why you lost the track. You get into an area where there's 3 bucks chasing a doe, it's a mess. You get these areas where it's really difficult and it's really hard to figure out where you are when you're walking. And I walk circles, and it's hard to remember where you are in relation to where you lost the track. I'll mark it on my GPS when I decide to start circling, and that helps me a lot because I can pull it up on there and really zoom in and see where I am in relation to where I lost the track. And that helps me kind of decide, where I'm at. So I'm not just randomly walking all over the place, but you got to look, you got to search and search and search and search. And sometimes you'll pick them up again. Sometimes it's just too big of a mess. You get 3 bucks chasing a doe, it can be a mess, and it can cover a huge, vast area. They go back and forth and around and around and around, and trying to sort that. I've lost them, plain and simple. You're going to lose them. You're going to run into those, and you're going to lose them. There's too many tracks over too huge of an area. So if you lose a track, you do your best. You just keep circling and searching and don't give up. If it gets tough, if the going gets tough, just be bound and determined to stick with it. And a lot of times you will sort it out. And again, the better you become at it, the easier it is to sort them out.
Sure. So maybe we want to transition to, I know a lot of the guys had posted questions about how mature bucks behave when they, I guess, lay down their tracks, or you're tracking them, versus an immature buck, or what do you see differently about how they travel, the types of terrains that they travel in, how they enter their beds, Do you want to touch on some of that?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of I'm a carpenter by trade, and I equate it to an old experienced carpenter versus a young kid on the job. A older buck knows what he's going to do. He knows why he's going to do it, and he does it for a purpose and a reason. And he doesn't waste a lot of energy doing things for random reasons. They always have purpose, and you can tell that when you follow enough of a mature buck's track. He knows where he's going. He knows how to get there. Sometimes you scratch your head as to why he's going a certain way or whatever, until you discover a little bit more about the area, and you found out, wow, that seemed like a rough way through there, but that's the easiest way through there. There's no other good way through there.
Sure.
And they know how to get from here to there the easiest, quickest, safest ways.
Are you kind of marveled sometimes at how, I guess, at their understanding of their natural environment and how they can find those pathways?
Oh yeah, it's vast areas, miles and miles and miles, and they know exactly where to go. They'll follow a river for 2 miles, and they'll cross in the only spot that you could get across without swimming. You know, they know where them spots are, and they'll, again, if you find one of those, map it, because if you have nothing better to do and you don't have any snow, it's a good place to sit. You know, if that buck happens to be traveling that area, he's crossing there. He's coming back.
Sure.
You know, they are so predictable because of that reason. They don't do anything for random reasons. Everything is thought out. Everything is precise. And that one flaw in their character, actually, because they are so predictable. If you learn a buck, you can take 1,000 acres and narrow it down to a few paths.
Yeah, I've heard Dan mention that before as well when he approaches his large swamps.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I go back year after year after year and find the same buck crossing the same spot in the road every year until he finally doesn't show up anymore, and I figure he's dead. But yeah, they are very predictable. They know exactly how to use the terrain and how they memorize all that and can remember all that, know where they are all the time. I don't know, but they do. They always know where they're at, and they know where they're going, and they know how they want to get there. They make it sidetracked, hot doe or something, but inevitably they'll come back. The one I shot in Michigan with the muzzleloader, I tracked him the year before. He came across the road. I'm sure it was the same buck. He came across the road in the same spot the year earlier, and I pulled off him because it was getting late in the day, not knowing that he was probably only bedded a quarter mile away. And then the next year I picked him up where he crossed the road there, and I started him there, and yeah, I don't think I went a half mile total before I killed him. And you could tell where he went back in there, that looks like the perfect place for a big buck like that to hang out. There was rubs back in there. There were beds back in there. And I'm certain that's his home. That was kind of his core area there. And the year before, I just gave up on him too soon. It was getting late in the day, and I was a long ways away from my truck, and I figured I better turn back now. But that's just one example of, you know, 10s to 20s of big bucks I've been on that year after year after year use the same pattern of movement, to the point where when you start seeing the same pattern over and over and over again, they're all doing it.
Have you got a sense for specific types of areas that they bed in these big woods, the mature bucks rather, like topography wise, or maybe how the trees are laid out or the undergrowth? That's sort of common.
Of course, they always look for a safe spot. You know, they would like to be on a hump. They like to have visibility. But the bottom line is that we're talking the rut. And when it's time for them to bed down, they'll find a safe area in that area they're in, and they'll hunker down. I don't think you could come back and bow hunt him there and hope for any luck, unless you happen to get lucky and that was his home core area. a lot of their beds seem very random during the rut, and I think they somewhat are. They will get into some thick stuff, and they'll lay on the edge where they got some visibility. Again, wind can be a factor as how they lay down as well, but those beds are what I would call rut beds. They may use them year after year when they get into that area because they know the area, but they're not a typical bed and feed type bed. So it's a little bit different.
Sure. You have
but they almost always J-hook, like Dan talks about them J-hooking, but doing a button hook or whatever before they bed. They almost always do that up north, anywhere I've been. They all like to do that. They like to walk past where they're going to bed and then circle back around and lay down and watch. And I think it's because of the predators. They can just sit right there and they can lead the predator right by them. And by the time the predator knows what's going on, they're gone. They slip out the back.
Sure.
Makes perfect sense.
So do you get a sense, I guess, on some of the tracks you've done, the sense of range that a mature buck will take? Like how many miles he may roam on a given day or live in? Or is it?
Well, again, a lot of my hunting is rut-based, so they're on the move. The furthest I've ever taken a track and not caught up to him was 6 miles. And who knows how long he went before I picked up the track, and who knows how far he went after that.
Right.
So I can verify 6 miles. It wouldn't shock me a bit to hear 10, 12. If you think about it, if they walk 2 miles an hour, it doesn't take many hours for them to walk 12 miles. 6 hours, they're 12 miles away. And believe me, when the rut is on, if they're not with a doe, they're looking. They'll lay down and rest a little bit.
Yeah, I think the other factor is too, a lot of times we often default to how fast we could travel 2 miles. And, we've all seen deer. I mean, deer can cover ground and hard terrain too. I mean, I've seen deer move through cattails and a swamp. They'll cut across a 150, 200 yard section in a matter of minutes that might take you, 30 minutes to get across because
and
of the depth and
wet
the
and you're
thickness.
panting and it's exhausted and he's
Right.
in 6 minutes. I know, I've been there.
Right, and you see this buck cruise across it like it was nothing, or climb up the side of the ridge. So, yeah, I agree. They can cover some ground if they need to.
Well, you got to remember that they're built to walk, and we don't walk every day. They do. That's just nature for them to walk, and for them to go and hike 12 miles really isn't that big of a deal for them.
Right.
It's really, and you follow them. They'll hardly stop. They'll hardly ever eat. I don't know how they survive. They just go. They're just like the Energizer Bunny. They just keep going and going and going and going and going, and it's amazing. They just, I don't know when they eat. They'll stop and they'll nibble a little bit of this or that, and then they're on their way again. And here's another thing too. I read all the information that I could get my hands on and did a lot of studying and everything. And they talk about, well, the buck will he'll feed up and then he'll lay down. Well, I have not found that in the areas that I hunt to be really reliable at all. I'll see him stop and he'll feed up simply because it's available right there in front of his nose. And so he'll stop and take advantage of whatever it is that he finds. And then he'll take off again. There are some instances where I've seen them do that, where they'll stop and they'll really paw the ground a lot and feed up real hard. Then I would be really on alert. But very seldom do I ever see them really feed up hard. I've not found it to be reliable. You're walking across wide open woods and you hit thick cover, and all of a sudden you're on red alert thinking, okay, he's going to bed down because he went in this thick stuff. You'll play that game in your mind all day long, and it'll drive you crazy. Again, don't assume that he's going to lay down because he cut into some thick cover. Don't slow down. Just keep going. And try to catch up to him and jump him, because I've made that mistake of slowing down so many times when I get into a certain cover. It looks just like he's going to be bedded there. only to go through 5 or 6 more areas like that, and it's getting dark, and I'm heading back out, and I still haven't caught him.
Right.
So I don't assume anymore. I don't try to guess anymore where he is. I don't try to guess where he's going to lay down. I just take the track, and I just push as many miles as I can, move as fast as I can, and still be, alert, and I'll catch up to him when I catch up to him. And I don't worry about it. Other people ask me about the wind. I don't worry about the wind. If the wind is in my favor, if it's not in my favor, I don't care. I have to follow that track to catch up to him. I'm just going to keep going. You got to follow him.
You mentioned a couple times that they always J hook into that bed when they're going to bed down. Is there anything that you do when you're on red alert or you're in that hot zone where you think you could be close to them to adjust for the fact that they're J hooking into it? Or is that more just a mental note that you're going to see a set of tracks veer off from the predominant direction that they're going, and that's an indicator to you that I'm close?
Again, that's a game that'll get you frustrated more times than not. He'll change directions, and it'll look like it's thick cover there, and you'll think, oh, he's going to J hook and lay down. And here's the deal: if you are on the J hook, you're already too late. He already knows you're there. Okay. So by the time you discover the J hook, it's more of an observation that I've just thrown out there. That they always J hook. By the time you're on the J hook, it's too late.
You're too close, and he's busted you. Yeah.
Right. He's already got you. So it's just more of an observation of habit that they do. Another thing too I've noticed quite often is they will rub before they lay down. Quite often. For some strange reason, they like to rub a tree before they lay down.
Now, how close? So how is it? It probably varies, but how close to the bed are you seeing those rubs? I mean, are they rubbing on the main trail, or is that just another observation you've picked up after you've busted them out of the bed?
I would say 100 yards would be a good, and then plus or minus 50 yards.
Sure.
That's kind of would be a good way to put it, maybe. But I've noticed them rub an awful lot.
That kind of falls in line with, I don't know, what Dan's observed or what he's talked about before, how a lot of guys set up, they'll see rubs if they're hunting beds, or if they might not know they're hunting beds, but they set up on those rubs, and those rubs are 100 yards out, 150 yards out from where the bed is, and they maybe don't judge how long it takes that buck to get up and walk to them from their bed. Those rubs aren't as close to the buck, I guess, as one might think. Yeah,
well, and again, we're talking rut activity versus a lot of the hunting Dan does is, a bed and feed type pattern.
Sure.
That's a little bit different situation, but still, again, something I'm throwing out there that I know quite often. And I hear a lot of guys say too, I don't want to track them because I'm afraid somebody else is going to shoot my deer. And I always laugh when somebody refers to a deer as theirs before they got it. It isn't your deer until you're punching your tag. And again, I'll go back to that. You don't get 100% of the deer that you don't track. I can't shoot a deer if I don't track them. And let the chips fall where they may. If somebody else shoots a deer that I was tracking, good for them. I'll help drag it out. I don't care. We got to get out of that mentality of my deer type situation. Go hunt, have fun. And if you push a deer onto somebody else and they get it, good for them. They earned it. They found a good spot and they picked the right spot and they were there and they got a deer and it's going to happen. I had one shot that I was tracking. Now I didn't push it to the guy because I didn't even freshen the deer up. So he didn't even know he was behind me, or that I was behind him, but it happened. The gun went off. I knew there was 2 trucks parked up the road, and later on that day I went back and I saw 2 old timers had this buck pulled out by their truck, and I went up and congratulated them, shook their hand, asked them if I could take a few pictures, and on my way I went, and I was happy for them.
Right.
And again, it's not my deer until I put a tag on them. So I don't worry about things like that. You got to track them to get them. And if something happens and some other hunter gets the deer you were after, you just be happy for them. And it's part of the hunt. It's it's a little, I guess it's a mentality, a little different mentality. You got to go about it.
Well, yeah, and I think I don't know, it's a healthy mentality because a lot of guys kind of drive themselves nuts or do some crazy things because they're singularly focused on a specific deer, and we've heard all the stories, guys burning friendships and things like that because that's their deer they want to get, but there's always other deer out there, always other adventures.
And my mentality has changed over the years too. When I was younger, I felt that way. I was, it was so important for me to get a deer, and and if somebody else got a deer and I didn't get my deer, that made me jealous,
Right.
and I don't feel that way anymore. I was driving down the road one day in Minnesota, and this guy was in the woods there a ways, and I stopped and I looked in there and see what he was up to, and I see he had a deer laying there. So I got out and I walked in. He had a really nice buck. It was probably a 5-year-old buck. Not much for a rack, but boy, a dandy old buck. And I helped him drag it out to the road, and he told me the story. Him and his brother parked the vehicle, and his brother headed back in the woods, and he just jumped out on the road, and he was just walking down the forest road with his gun in his hand, and he heard some noise, and he looked over, and the deer was standing there, and he shot him. And that's like winning the lottery. That was so lucky, but I was happy for the guy.
Right.
He got a buck. He got a dandy too. It was score wise 115 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an old buck, and the tines were broke off and stuff.
Yeah.
But it was an old brute, and he was awful tickled, and I was happy for him. And that's the way it is. And you can't worry about those kind of things when you're tracking. And again, you can't worry. Well, my goal is to shoot a 150s class. Well, if your goal is to shoot a 150, then don't track because there's no way you're going to have time to judge them.
Sure.
Matter of fact, I shot one in Wisconsin that had not been for a broken tine would have made 150, and to me that's an awful dandy buck.
Yeah.
And a guy, I had to go after him the second day. I had him wounded, and I went back after him the second day, and the guy that was with me, he ended up putting the last bullet in it, and he says, "It's a lot bigger than you told me." He asked me how big it was, and I said, "I don't know, it's 125, maybe 130." So I had no idea, and I saw the deer like 3 times. So you're not going to be able to score them, not especially up north with them darker racks and that thick brush. You have to make a decision whether you want to shoot or not, and you just shoot. And then, if it's a 120, be happy. If it's a 150, great.
Well, you got the adventure to go along with it, and that's that's a lot of the fun.
Well, and that is a big part of that tracking for me is being able to just be moving around all day, and it's an adventure. Every day is a new adventure. Every day is fun. It's not getting up in the dark, stumbling through the woods in the dark, getting in a stand and sitting there for 10 hours and freezing day after day. And in the Northwoods, if you see a deer, it's a good day. And you string together a whole season of sitting in that tree from dark to dark, that gets old. And tracking is an adventure every day. It's exciting. It's, you never know what's going to happen next. And like I tell everybody, I feel the odds are in my favor because I'm always after a big buck every day. When I'm in a tree stand, I don't know if there's a big buck within 100 miles of me, but when I'm on a track, I know there's a big buck in front of me every day.
Right.
So if my luck is 5% at tracking, all I got to do is take 20 deer.
Yeah.
So that's and you're gonna go through stretches where you just don't catch them. You just don't get a shot. Things just don't go your way, and then you're gonna get stretches where, boy, that was way too easy. And it just how it works out. It just sometimes things go your way, sometimes they don't. But you'll never learn anything about deer behavior like you will when you follow tracks through the woods. You learn things that will make you question everything you ever heard about, or read about in magazines and how deer behave and what they really do.
Well, you figure the majority of time, you spend on stand. I mean, even if you're bed hunting, I mean, you're looking to cut them off or get them moving out of their bedding and coming to you versus switching it around and you going to them or you getting on their track and following them and seeing, I guess, more intimately how they're behaving as they move across that terrain.
Well, again, there was a discussion on the beast about which way a buck travels in regards to wind. And when you follow 100 mature buck tracks, you start to see a pattern, and the pattern is they know where they want to go, and they go there. They don't care which way the wind is going, and they travel with purpose to get somewhere. And they will use their nose. They'll drop down and scent an area where there's a doe or a doe bedding area, or if there's a danger area, they'll really go on red alert and they circle around and use their nose to their advantage. And of course, they're always using their nose regardless of what direction they're traveling. But the bottom line is when you're sitting in a tree stand and a deer walks by you, you don't know how many twists and turns that buck made over the last 3 miles and how many different directions he traveled in regards to the wind. All you see is that 100 yards where he walked through in front of you, and then you check the wind and you say, oh, bucks walk with the wind in their nose because
Right.
That one walked with the wind in their nose. Well, he did at that moment, but if you would have backtracked him over the last 3 miles, he went in every other direction as well in regards to the wind. And I see that over and over and over again, that bucks travel, and of course it's an educated guess I'm making when I say that they have purpose and they go somewhere for a reason, but you kind of see it again and again and again, and it kind of makes sense that's logical that they knew where they were going. These bucks they'll cut through 3 miles, cross rivers at certain places. They'll know where there's saddles to cross across. They know how to avoid swamps, and out of the blue, bam, you'll end up on a little clear cut somewhere back in the middle of nowhere. Well, to me, that tells me that buck knew about that clear cut, and he went there to check that area for does.
Right. It wasn't coincidence. Yeah.
Right. And then he'll dive down and he'll circle around the edge of that clear cut, and he'll be scent checking that clear cut. And I know that isn't random. He didn't do that by accident. He didn't just stumble across that clear cut. He knew it was there 3 miles ago, and he knew how to get there.
I think that particular point speaks volumes for someone if they have the opportunity to hunt on a property, year in and year out, to really begin to understand how the deer move across that property and the patterns that they typically use, because that could help them.
No doubt.
Setups.
You own 80 acres somewhere, okay, and you don't have this buck living on your property. He's living on a property 3 miles away, and the rut comes in. And he comes through that area. When he crosses your property, he's crossing your property where he wants to cross your property, where he's been through there before. So if you're smart, you'll use those tracks to note where that buck crossed your property, and then next rut or later in that rut, you want to be positioned on that trail or be able to watch that trail, because if that buck comes back through again, I'll guarantee you he's going to come down that trail.
Sure.
And when I say trail, there really isn't any trail. Big bucks don't walk on trails, but it'll be an edge that he's following through that property, and he'll come through that edge again. And when he comes back through, he'll come back through that edge again. And it's simply because if you know the whole picture of where he's traveling, it makes perfect sense that that's the best, safest spot for him to get through there to get where he wants to go. And he'll continue to use it again and again and again until he runs into maybe some hunter scent there or some other danger or something changes. If the does aren't bedding in a certain area anymore, his pattern will change accordingly for him to get to where he needs to go. But until that pattern changes, he'll continue that pattern. That's the one thing I like to keep stressing to people is that, they're so patternable. It's not funny. They're ruts. I call them rut circuits. They use them year after year after year. I can be driving down a road and I can tell you, okay, we're going to come up over the top of the hill and we're going to hit this gully down here, and we get to this bottom. If there's a good buck in here, he's going to cross right there, and that's where the track will be.
Yeah.
And I know that from previous years.
Well, you got me really thinking about a few areas that I hunt, and I mean, just some of the patterns that I've observed, but then, especially in the rut, and how it got me thinking I maybe need to think a little bit deeper and observe a little bit more on how I could get back to some of these areas during the specific time and watch some of these corridors and see if history repeats himself, because, it could pay off again.
Well, there's no doubt. And again, getting back to, just common sense, if you start to learn a buck's travel area, but you focus on areas near his core, you're a lot better off, because again, he's spending more time when he does go back to his core area. He comes into his core area and he leaves his core area. But if you happen to find where a different part of his circuit that's 3 miles away from his core area, well, he might only come through there once or twice during the rut. And depending on, how many does and how far he travels and how big his area is and so forth. So the closer you are to his core, the better your likelihood that you're going to get a chance to, to lay eyes on him during the light of day. And here's another thing too. Even these big old bucks, even in the north, they don't travel a whole lot during the day. They'll get up and go during the day. I've seen it a lot of times, but more often than not, they'll travel at night, and they find these does at night, and they lock up with them, and they stay with them does, and all the hunters come back to camp, and they say, boy, the rut must be on, but all I'm seeing is small bucks. Well, the reason for that is because the bigger mature bucks are already locked up, and they're not going to be moving. They're not going to be running. And then when they're done with that doe, then they get back on their rut circuits to go looking during the night for another doe, and they'll lock up with another doe.
Sure.
And again, they're down. They're off the grid. And so it's not what I'm seeing is what other guys are saying, and that is all I'm seeing is small bucks moving all the time. And the reason for that is all the big mature bucks are locked up on does, and they're finding the does at night because they mostly move during the night. So there's a reason why the guys aren't seeing the big bucks moving during the daytime. And I'm sure that's the same in farm country, hill country, everywhere you go. I have a feeling that it's really no different.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now, a couple of the areas I hunt, it's interesting that, if you're on stand and there's nothing moving, thinking in this mindset to get off a stand and kind of slip into the swamp and start using some of these, I guess I'd call them guerrilla tactics, where you're slipping in, mimicking a deer behavior and movement, and trying to get up into an area and cut across some tracks where there's mature deer held up, sort of going to them instead of waiting for them to come to you. Yeah,
and again, getting back to taking away from the North Country where there's vast territories, even if you own 40 acres, there's no reason why you can't, if you pick up a good track on a fresh snow, go after them. Again, it's not your deer, and you might scare them off of your property, and somebody else might shoot them, but I know you won't shoot them if you don't go after them.
Right.
It's that I'm going to protect my deer mentality that makes sure you don't put a tag on them.
Yeah.
Be smart about it. If you only have 40 acres, then don't use my tactic of going really fast. Then go deathly slow.
Mm-hmm.
A square 40 is only a quarter mile. If you just, really creep through really, really slow, chances are you probably get a chance at them. But you won't get a chance if you don't. If nothing else, at least note where he crossed so you know where he's coming back through again. A lot of this stuff I hear the guys that, I don't have those big acreages where I can do this, but a lot of these advantages you can use on small properties as well.
Right. Right.
It's not just a big woods tactic. It's more fun in the big woods because I can go 6 miles and I don't have to worry about running into a no trespassing sign. And that's why I go to those areas because of that. It's more fun for me to not have to stop because he hit a private piece or something. But still, I mean, there's a lot of advantages to it when you're in small acreages. Why not use it to your advantage? I don't know. It's that thinking outside the box, doing something that somebody else isn't doing.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So I'm looking across some of the other questions. I mean, you covered a lot of the information that people were asking. This has been really good. The one thing we really haven't touched on is some of the bigger bucks that you've killed while tracking, or some of your favorite stories of bucks that you've killed. I know you have a few mentioned in your notes here. Do you want to touch on some of those? And
yeah, I'll start with the first one I ever got. I went out and I read the books and watched the videos, and I got a lot of sand country where I live, and I went out and I started studying tracks during the summertime and just trying to get a feel for tracks and looking at them and getting used to really looking at them again for the first time, really studying a track instead of saying, oh, there's a deer track, or, oh, that looks like a nice one, but really looking at them. And, and I studied all this, and I was going to go out in the woods and I was going to be a Benoit from the first day. I was going to go out and just shoot this trophy deer, and I was so confident, oh, this is going to be easy, And 3 days in, I was so frustrated. I was losing every track. The snow wasn't the greatest, and it was frustrating. And every time a deer would run into a pile of other deer, and I shouldn't say a pile, but it'd be like a doe and 2 fawns or whatever, and they would be all tracked up, and I would lose the track right away. And it was like, man, this is crazy. This is nuts. And I can remember going back to my camper that third night, and I sat there and I thought about it all, and I thought, I can't be Tiger Woods of golf the first day out. But what I can do is I can get better every day.
right.
So I changed my goal to, I just want to get better every day. I'm going to learn something for every track I take. I want to learn something. And the 4th day out, I caught a nice track coming across the road, and I followed him down into this swamp. And he hooked up with this doe, and I could tell there was a doe and 2 fawns by really studying things out, really paying more attention and trying to learn. And well, he started chasing this doe, and which was kind of odd. The fawns never left her. Usually the fawns break off when she's in heat, but they didn't leave her. They stayed with her, and they were running around in circles, and it was the thickest stuff. And they were running around and around, and there was thousands of tracks everywhere. And I walked a few circles around in there, and again, I was getting really frustrated. And then it kind of dawned on me, he's running around and around and around in circles. They're probably right here yet. And I thought, I'm just going to step off to the side over here where I got a little bit better advantage along the edge of this swamp, and I'm going to sit down for 1 hour. And if I don't see them, then I'm going to get up and I'm going to start looking, making big circles and seeing if I can find where they left. And I no more than positioned myself where I wanted to be, and here they came running. The doe, 2 fawns, and this buck chasing them. And I pulled the 30-06, and I shot 2 times. I hit him in the front shoulder both times. I rolled him over, and he wasn't the buck I really wanted. He was a 3-year-old, maybe a 110, 115-inch buck, and I kind of knew that in my heart as I was walking up. I was kind of like, I didn't seem like he was really that big, and I was kind of down on it. But I said, man, I didn't actually track him the traditional tracking way, but my tracking put me here, and using my head got me this deer. This is a great thing. This is my first deer tracking. I would consider tracking, so right. I was excited about it, even though I didn't have the rack I really wanted. And looking back, the thing that made me take the track was he had one bummed up hoof, and it made it look like he had a really big print. And so, my not knowing really what I was doing, I was going by the biggest track instead of what my rule nowadays is to go with the smallest track in a series. I kept seeing how big that 1 foot. Well, he had a hump that one foot was kind of bummed up, and made it look really big. But anyway, once I let the dust settle a little bit, I thought, this is great. This works. I got myself a buck, doing this. So that was the start.
Well, I think it's a good story to tell because I don't know. I think in a lot of other venues, and we're all guilty of this, as you start pursuing mature animals, but we do tend to focus too much on the trophy, right? And don't focus enough on the path that we took to get there. And a lot of times the path that we took to get there is a heck of a lot more exciting, than the end result, or at least so and you grow a lot and learn a lot during that path that you take. So no, that's a good story. Good one.
I'll tell you another one about one that I didn't get, but it's kind of humorous. I chased one in Minnesota, and I don't remember now, 3 miles maybe I put on him, but I was really determined to catch him, and I was really pushing hard, and he took me through this section of what I call a cranberry swamp. It's like cranberry brush, I call it, and it's really boggy stuff, and it's really taxing to walk through it. Every step just drags you down, and I pushed so hard through this stuff, and I came up on a clear cut, and I was pretty exhausted, and I'm following his track up this clear cut going uphill, and I came around this small hump, and as soon as I made the corner of that small hump, I looked up ahead, up on top of this big hill. There he is, and he's just standing there, broadside. And I put up the gun, and I'm panting so hard I can't even hold the bead on him, very good or whatever. I try my best, and I don't know, about 125 yards away, offhand, and I shoot, and he just stood there. I pumped another round in, and it's like, aim, pull a bead on him. He's just standing there, So I shoot again, and I hit him, and he mule kicked, and he took off. And I thought, okay, well, I got this one. So I gave him a little time, not very much, I don't know, 15 minutes or whatever, and then I walked up there, and I started following the blood, and it was not good. And the snow wasn't real good either, and it was getting warm. It was melting, and I followed him really slowly for about maybe a couple 100 yards, and I let him go. I figured I'm going to let him go overnight, and I'll come back in the morning. So I came back the next day, and I got on his track again, and I followed him around. He made about a half a mile loop. He came right back out on the same clear cut, and it got really dicey out there. The snow was pretty melted already, and I was having a hard time keeping up with his track anymore because the snow was just almost gone. And I'm picking my way through there. There was other deer tracks, of course, on that clear cut, and I'm picking my way, and I got up on the hump of a rise there, and I looked back across way over, 300 yards away to that big hump that I shot him off the day before, and he was standing on it.
Really?
So, yeah, he went right back to the same spot he was in the day before. And that was too far for an offhand shot to try to, I'm not going to lob a bullet in like that. So what I did is I ducked down, and I circled, and I stayed low, and I popped up about 125 yards away, 150 yards away from that hump, and he was gone. And the snow was so bad that I just couldn't stay with him after that. It had melted so bad, so I never did get him. But it's curious that buck was willing to go right back to the same bed. He had a nice bed on top of that hill there. He went right back to the same bed where he got shot out of the day before. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I mean, he must have really liked it there or had a short-term memory.
Yeah, I don't know, but that was, I guess that kind of taught me a lesson that, you can disturb them. You can even shoot them, and they'll come back. That's a lesson I learned, and I never take anything as being random anymore that I see in the woods. If he did that, I'm sure other deer will do it too.
Well, he might have had a really good vantage point from that area, and that maybe was in his instinct, was the safest bed that he could, be in.
Oh, there's no doubt. That bed, when you sat in that bed there, he was king of the mountain, and he could see everywhere, and there's no way anybody was going to come up on him. The way I came up on him, it was just a miracle that he didn't see me sooner. And I'm surprised that I even got a shot at him the day before where he was sitting there.
Right. Good. Any other ones you want to talk about?
That was a memorable one, even though I didn't get him. But I don't know.
I think you got a
Probably
couple.
my favorite was the big 8-pointer I shot up in Minnesota. That was on my 50th birthday, and that was the one I was telling you about he crossed the road in the same spot the year before where I left him off. I took that track at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I had my tag on him by, I don't know, 9:15, 9:30. It was with the muzzleloader. It was the first tracking deer I got with my muzzleloader. It was on my birthday. I don't know if there's anything memorable as far as from a learning standpoint, except for the fact that, like I was saying, I squeezed the poop and I could tell that it was very soft. Keeping track of that, watching that kind of stuff. Being aware that the deer is very close at that time, and to be very careful. The one thing that is burnt in my memory with that one is the encounter itself. I think we saw each other at the same exact moment, and it was bizarre to the point of it's like time froze, because I'm looking at him and he's looking at me, and neither one of us are doing anything, and it seemed like a lifetime, even though it was probably just 2 seconds maybe. But it was so weird. It was like I couldn't even pull my gun up to shoot him, and in my mind, I'm already telling myself, you're gonna have to shoot him on the run, and that's exactly what happened. By the time I got myself to pull the gun up, he took off, and I just pulled out in front of him, and as soon as he crossed in front of the gun, I just pulled the trigger and I hit him and got him. But that one, I guess, was memorable because it was my 50th birthday, and it was a short hunt, and that's the way it can go. I've had several bucks that I've shot go into an area, be in and out in one day.
Right.
It can be done. You don't necessarily have to know the area you're going to. You don't have to pre-scout it. You can go into an area you've never been into before and have just as much luck as an area that you put 50 years into. It's one of the things that plays in my advantage because of my job, and I don't get a lot of hunting time anymore until November, and so it's handy for me. And my hunting areas are 3 to 7 hours away.
Right.
So I can't really get up to do any scouting or anything. So it's a tactic that can work for, going into an area cold and you can be successful.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good point. I mean, you're learning and learned a craft that allows you to go into a green area and use the sign that you're immediately picking up as you're on foot to get yourself on an animal. Yeah, it's different than what a lot of other guys do. I mean, typically they're scouting out of season, which typically takes a lot of time. You'll spend more time scouting out of season than you do hunting in season if you're trying to hunt sets over beds, where they're coming out of feeding and things like that. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and here's another thing too. It's tougher than it sounds, and you get what I would consider ideal or perfect snow conditions if you're lucky 2, maybe 3 times in a season.
Mm-hmm.
And I hunt Minnesota, I jump to Wisconsin, and then I jump to the UP. So, I'm on the road for about a month or a little bit more than that. And in that stretch of time, I might get 2 or 3 days where I say this is absolutely perfect tracking snow. The rest of the time I'm hunting snow that's old. I'm hunting crunchy snow. There's you're not going to get that crystal perfect snowfall that you want, or it'll snow at the wrong time. You finally wait for snow and it'll come at the wrong time. It comes during the day, and then you wait for snow. You wait to get up the next day to go, and then it snows again the next morning, and it wipes out all your tracks from the night before.
Right.
You know, so the timing of the snow can really mess you up as well. You can get the perfect snow, but at the wrong time. And you know, there's a lot to it. And deep snow, it's very hard to judge tracks in deep snow. They all look the same. I was on a really big buck one time, and the snow just came down like crazy. Well, not one time, many times, where the snow just opens up and it just snows, and it snows in the tracks.
Yeah.
You know, and you got a lot of effort into it, and you're done. You know, you pack it in and say, okay. You know, you can't even tell a fawn track from a big buck track anymore. You know, the snow comes down and you get about 2-3 inches on top of what was there, and it's amazing how little bit of snow it takes to really mess up your tracks. You know, that sky can open up, and you can even get like a half inch of snow, and it can really mess things up to where it's really hard to tell. So, you know, it's a craft that if you're going to be good at it, you're going to have to learn all the different conditions, and you're going to have to, you know, not just that perfect once or twice a year that you're going to run into. You're going to have to learn how to deal with all the other conditions. You know, you get crunchy snow, you'll get that a lot. It'll snow, it warms up, it freezes, and it's crunchy to the point where you're not going to come up on a deer. You know, at those times, you're almost better off to just backtrack them or just follow them just to learn where they go, where they do their crossings, and you know, and bank that information. Another thing I do is every time I take a track, I turn my GPS tracking on, and I use my trails, and I track every buck that I go after. And then when I'm done tracking that deer, I go back and I look at that track in detail when I'm sitting down back at the camper, because I learned so much about how deer use the terrain and where that individual deer traveled. Because I've got the trail. When you're following a deer through the woods, you don't really know where you are. It doesn't make sense, you know, maybe where you are. If you're paying attention to where you are, you're not hunting.
Right.
And then when you're sitting back at home and looking at that map of where you went, it's pretty neat. You learn a lot. I learned more at home sitting there in my camper and looking at where I went that day than I do when I'm actually following the track. It's a really good tool.
Yeah, that My Trails app is really good for that, because I use that on my phone as well, but you can swap in, you know, a topo map or the aerial imagery, or, you know, different maps that are available, then lay those GPS tracks over it. But that's got to be pretty cool. Do you ever take and compare, you know, overlay maybe multiple years of different paths that you've followed to kind of look at if there is patterns that you see on specific properties about how deer move?
Well, I see how deer move in like in the north there. You wouldn't call them a property, but it's you know, vast areas, and that's where I come to the conclusion that these are animals that use the edge. They're always using an edge. They're always following some sort of an edge. You know, and because it's so vast, and because there are so many edges out there, even if you're hunting an edge, you're still trying to win the lottery. But if you're hunting an edge that a big buck is using, now you're in the game. You know,
so here's these
tracks, go ahead.
Well, I guess here's a kind of a question that leads into that. If let's say you're hunting differently, you're not track hunting, you're bow hunting, and you're going to go set up a mobile set. How does what you've learned doing the tracking style of hunting sort of adjust where your mobile set is going to be, or how you may set up? Does it affect
it? Well, and again, I really don't get much time up north to hunt prior to the rut.
Okay.
But if I do get a chance to get up there and it is during the rut, I know where to sit. I've got specific spots picked out along these travel corridors that a specific buck is using. And so I'm putting myself in the game. And the more I follow a specific deer, or pick up his tracks here or there, I always note where they cross, and I start to draw a map in my head of where these deer are, so that if I am going to do a bow hunt, I know where to pop a stand in somewhere where I know he walks, where he does go there. Now, again, your odds are still low, but they're a lot better than they were.
Right, right. Or you're
I mean,
finding that spot, like you mentioned, that river crossing where, more than one deer is probably going to take that path because that's the preferred path in that area, that crossing.
That is correct. That is correct, because one buck is using it. There could be 3 or 4 big ones using it.
Right.
And because they learn from each other, and they all take the easiest path. So yeah, if you have a really good crossing like that, you may have 3 or 4 big bucks using that crossing, and then your odds go up even better. So yes, but again, what good is a bottleneck or an edge if there aren't any big deer using it?
Sure.
That one deer I tracked last year, he was headed right for a monstrous bottleneck, and he's following the edge of the swamp all the way there. And I'm thinking, I can't believe he's going to go through that bottleneck. Every year there's a hunter in there. Every year somebody's sitting there. And I'm thinking, that's so bizarre that he's going to go there. And he went all the way along the edge of that swamp, and he got to the point where he needed to turn and keep following that swamp and go right through that bottleneck, and instead he cut right across, and he crossed the swamp in a different spot. And I laughed when I saw that. I laughed. I said, okay, that makes sense, because he didn't go through that bottleneck. I didn't believe that he would go through. Maybe during night he would, but I was just kind of curious as to whether he's actually going to go through that bottleneck or not. And he decided not to, and he cut across, and he went a different way and followed the swamp on the other side then, and he ended up about 4 miles away before I jumped that one up, which was bizarre because he turned around and ran the exact same way that he came. Because when I was following him, he wasn't chased. It was just his normal movement. But when I bumped him, he had circled around and laid down. And when I bumped him, he was heading back the other way. He crossed the highway, and he went right back to the same path, and he ran all the way back to where I started tracking him.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, he took the same exact course all the way through, which is funny, but it makes sense. I mean, that's his travel route. Why wouldn't he?
All right, that's the quickest and safest way that he knows through that terrain.
Yeah, to get out of there and to get to someplace safer. And I watched that buck 2 years ago crossing the road, and I never tracked him. And then last year I finally got a chance to get on him, and I learned a lot about him in one track. And I think I know where his home is now. So next year when I go back up there, that's one of the areas I'm going to focus on. I'm going to be watching where I think his home core is, and I'm going to see if I can't pick up his track, because he was a good one. So he was one well worth following. So he'll be a year older yet.
Sure.
So and it's a series of doing this year after year after year. I don't get a lot of snow. There's some seasons I don't get any snow at all. So there's a lot of gaps, and I don't get to gather a lot of data because I'm not up there. If I lived up there, I'd be following tracks after season. I'd be following tracks after I tagged out. I'd be following them just to learn them, and patterning these bucks out, because then I would definitely be bow hunting for these deer, and I'd know exactly where to hunt them. But it's a series of that year after year. I get back on the same deer 3-4 times maybe, and then all of a sudden they vanish. Well, I'm sure they die. I'm sure they're dead. And it's kind of a fun game. Every year you've got a few picked out that you knew from the year before, and you wonder if you're going to run into them again, or if you're getting their chance at them again. And you don't get them. You get, I don't know, maybe you do get 1 out of 20 tracks you take, or whatever. Sometimes you can get them back to back. You can go out and take a track, and then the next state you go to, you get a track and you get one. And then you can go 2 years without getting one, bad
Right.
snow or just bad luck, or, whatever the case is. But I'll tell you, if you want to learn how to deer hunt for trophy deer, especially in that North Country, start following tracks. You don't have to read magazines. You don't have to ask anybody anything. Just start following tracks and just note everything you see. and just keep remembering everything you see. Any behavior that they show is something that's typical. I always thought behavior that didn't match the magazines was an oddity, but I've come to learn that it's not an oddity anymore. If you see it in the wild, there's a reason for it, even if it doesn't match what the other guy is saying or what the magazine article says or what the expert tells you. I've learned that there's not too many oddities. Deer do things for a reason, and they do them again and again and again. Just because it doesn't match what somebody else has told you or what you've been taught, that doesn't make it wrong.
Right. Very good. No, lots of good information. Well, I don't know if there's anything else you want to cover. We've got, I know we've been talking for quite a while. You probably want to get some rest since you've had some long days working. But anything else you think you've missed that you want to touch on?
I don't know right offhand, and I have these questions that these people are asking. It's going to be hard to read through them quick here, but
yeah, I've been reading through them as we've been going.
Okay.
We've touched on low density versus high deer density, how it affects the track makeup. Some other questions were regarding, the type of topography that you see them bed in. Is it bedding up high, bedding down low, bedding in thick?
Well, they like cover and they like to have visibility. So if you can add the two of them together, and they like to have a little bit of height if they can, So if you add those three together, that's a good spot. But again, in that Northwoods, that's everywhere.
Right.
I mean, it's so hard to judge where they're going to decide to lay down. There's one thing I'd like to cover. I guess we haven't touched on this, and somebody's going to ask this. What do I do after I bump them and don't get them?
Sure. Yep.
Good luck. I'll say that. It's tough. Once you got them going and they know you're after them, it's tough. Okay? The only method I've ever had any luck with is give them time, an hour if you can, whatever. Give them some time to cool down. They don't run very far, believe it or not. Very seldom will they go over a half a mile. And they usually want to lay down again because I don't think they like to be moving around during the light of day. So they'll usually bed again. But they're waiting for you. So I think if you give them an hour, that helps them cool down a little bit and almost forget about you a little bit because they probably sit there and stare and you're not coming.
Right.
Right. But what I do is, of course, when they first go, they're running like crazy. So as long as they're running like crazy, I just go. I go fast. I don't worry about it. I don't care if I make noise. I don't care if I, step on some brush or something. And then eventually they'll slow down to a trot. And then I still don't worry about it too much. I just keep moving. And when they finally slow down to where they're walking, then I get really serious about really going slow. And I kind of gauge that by how far they traveled. I'm assuming I'm probably going to bump into them in a half a mile. So, if they ran for over a quarter mile already, well, I figure they're probably within a quarter mile of me right now, and I go into a death crawl. I mean, if you were standing there watching me, you might not see me move.
Okay.
And it's so deathly hard to make yourself move that slow. It's almost impossible to force yourself to move that slow. No hand movements. You don't scratch your nose. You don't, move your hand quick. You don't, nothing fast at all. I mean, you just kind of just slide forward through the woods. You want your body to kind of move as one unit forward very, very slowly and just rip the woods apart with your eyes. And I've got on them that way. I've got on them, after I bumped them initially, but it's tough. It is tough.
I mean, and
that's the only method
that's got to take a lot of patience and significant amount of time, I would think, too.
It's tough. It's hard to make yourself go that slow so where you're hardly even noticeable that you're moving and gauging every step. I mean, I slide my foot forward and I feel the ground with my toes,
Right.
I don't want to break any branches or anything at that point, and I'll even like slide stuff out of the way with my toes and kind of put the ball of my foot down and just slowly let my weight move forward onto that foot. And if I feel something at that point, I'll actually stop, and then kind of see if I can reposition my foot. But yeah, I mean, I'm talking so slow that if you're watching me, you might not be able to tell I'm moving. I mean, it's, and you don't get very far. So, but all the ones I jump, they usually stop within a half a mile or so, usually. So, I think it's worth the risk of going that slow and just really tearing the woods apart with your eyes and hoping you're going to get a chance at them.
Right.
If you move any faster than that, they're going to see you for sure. They position themselves to watch. They're used to being chased by wolves and coyotes and stuff, and they know how to play the game. They run a ways and then they'll button hook and they'll lay down and they'll watch their backtrack and they're pretty keen on it now because they just got chased.
Right.
But you can do it because I've done it. So you can do it. It's possible to catch them after the fact. I think the more remote areas, some of these guys hunt some very remote areas where deer don't see people very often or at all. I think your success after that initial bump is a lot better because they just don't know what you are. But the areas I hunt, there's humans there all the time. They're fully aware of what you are. And and a lot of times you lose the game too because they happen to run and the wind is in their favor, and before you even get close enough to shoot, they already smell you. And so you'll come on an empty bed when you do catch up to them again, and because they winded you. I've had that happen a lot of times, and it's like, what do you do? Well, you just try.
Yeah, and I think one person asked that on one of the questions here was, what do you do if you happen to be tracking one and they have the wind in their favor? And I think he kind of answered that with, well, you try to do what you do. Don't worry about the wind and get on them. And, if they wind you, they wind you.
Well, here's another thing too. Common sense. If they drop down into a swamp and the wind is in their favor, just blow through there. Just go like crazy through there because they're going to smell you before you can see them anyway. So why waste time?
Right.
Just blow through there. And if they happen to be bedded in there and you blow them out, you would have lost anyway. So you might as well just get in there and get it done. Move them. And then give them some time and to cool down if you do bump them and try again, and you're not going to get a lot of chances during a day. You don't get very far in one day. You go, if you put on a 10 mile day, that's a really big day for me. And it's not because I can't walk any further. I'm beat after that, but it's just there's only so many hours in a day, and you can't move as fast as you think you'd like to.
Right. No, I can imagine. That's some distance.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking, if ideal conditions, a mile and a half, maybe on some stretches you can, bump that up to 2.5 miles an hour, but a lot of times, you're trying to sort out tracks, or you lose the track, so you go back or whatever, and time is burning, and then there's, like I say, there's only so many hours in a day, and you got to remember that it takes you time to find a track. It's not like you get up at first light and you're on a track right away. Sometimes I don't get on a track until afternoon. Sure. Yeah. And so then I'm really behind the 8 ball as far as time goes, but I go on them. I'll go on them late in the day. I can't get them if I don't try. So
very good.
That's how I handle the situations once I bump them. I move fast when they're moving fast. When they slow down to a walk, I just really go slow. And that's been the only method that's ever worked for me. I've never caught up with them any other way. They always see me or smell me or something before I get to them if I do anything different. I know other guys have tried other methods and stuff, but I've tried a lot of different things, and that's the only thing that's ever been successful for me once I bump them.
Sure.
Matter of fact, there was a tracker up in Minnesota that he even made the comment that once you bump them, just go find another one. You'd be better off to try to take one by surprise than to continue after one that knows you're after them. I always stay with the deer until I either lose them or it gets too late or whatever. As long as I'm on that deer, I stay with them. But the odds go way down. You're going to shoot most of your bucks on your first encounter. You're going to bump them up and you're going to get your shot. at least the areas I hunt.
Sure.
So I guess that's about it. If anybody's
Yeah.
got any questions, they can shoot me questions on the beast.
Yeah, we covered a lot of the, topics that people had listed on here, but as always, if you've got questions for Todd, I mean, this has been really informational. We covered the full gamut from clothing to looking at specific tracks, different tactics that you use while tracking. I mean, a bunch of different stories were covered in here. But again, Todd's name on the beast is Magic Man 54494, and we'll get this posted up there. And yeah, if you have any more questions, feel free to ask. This is really good. I appreciate you taking the time, Todd, to do this. I know you have a busy schedule, so.
Yeah, no problem. I'm reached that point in my career. I'd like to give back something now. I feel good about sharing knowledge with people, and I hope somebody uses this to go out and get a big buck.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of guys are going to be excited because there's a lot of people that were waiting to hear this information. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
That concludes today's podcast episode. Please go to thehuntingbeast.com to post any discussions, questions, or comments regarding today's podcast episode.